Okay, we'll go ahead and get started tonight at our Planning Commission meeting on, I was reading the minutes here, May 1st, that's the wrong date. We'll start with Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Davis will lead.
The audience, please arise. The audience, please repeat the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the first three items on tonight's meeting have to do with cell tower modifications. I've asked Dave if he would maybe brief us on all three of these, and then we'll just do one public hearing versus three. Does that sound okay with the commissioners?
Yep.
Good.
Thanks.
Perfect.
We have our driver back, never mind. If you can go to the, just like Google Slides. We've talked about similar proposals to add equipment to existing mobile communications or cell tower types of facilities. None of these is excuse me, I should maybe start over. None of these is necessarily unique from the types of proposals that we've seen before. I can't speak with any kind of technical expertise, but it's my understanding basically that the changes that we see typically have to do with evolving technology and different needs that companies have to meet the expectations of their customers. And that's something we really appreciate. We appreciate obviously having excellent service in this respect in the community. I think for the most part we do. That being said, to talk first about this proposal here, located in Spanish Fork City's North Park on city property. It's been there for a number of years. The proposal again has to do with changing out existing antennas, adding some additional equipment that wasn't there previously, and as such a conditional use approval. We think it's in the city's best interest to work with the owners of this tower to have it relocated. And that's something that we're talking about, we'll continue to talk about and see where that goes. I'm saying that in part based on a conversation I had earlier today with the company. So we'll continue to have that dialogue as we try to look out for what's best for the park and how that can be used long-term. So the staff report that you have on this item, like the other two cell towers, has some additional information relative to the specific plans. And in fact, Mike, I think the next slide does as well. You can see kind of from the nature of that schematic that it's kind of technical to see exactly what's proposed, but in short, there's equipment on the tower that would come off and be replaced by other equipment. Can you go to the next site for us? So this site here, not necessarily south end of the community, but south of where we are now, 5th South is a road that largely provides access to industrial uses. And we have a couple of towers in that part of the community. Again, similar proposal to the other and to the next one that we'll talk about relative to changing out equipment, also a conditional use. And again, just imagery that also is included in the staff report that you have relative to that change. This one here, like the first one, is on city-owned property. Similar type of modification. The screening on this tower is a little bit different from some of the others, relative to it being largely screened, maybe even completely screened by a masonry wall versus either a chain link or some type of a wrought iron type fence. And the staff doesn't have any concerns with the proposed changes and additions to this tower either. So that being said, 3 different towers. We'd suggest that you act on them individually with individual motions, whether that's a motion to approve or to deny. And staff has recommended that each of them be approved.
Okay.
So just to maybe to clarify and to reiterate something, in the case of conditional uses, the Planning Commission is the land use authority, so you'll take action for approval or denial, not to make a recommendation like you do on some other items.
Okay, so it does not go to the city council?
That's correct, yep.
Dave, question, are any of them getting taller or wider?
Yeah, that's a great question. Wider maybe by inches, not taller at all.
Okay.
Are any of them, do you know if they're doing anything with upgrading to 5G with any of these?
I don't think so, yeah.
I'm curious, when something like that comes to the city, what research or what do you guys, how do you determine whether that's something that's good to bring into a city or not?
We'll actually have a small cell ordinance for your consideration, I think in July. That's when I believe it's supposed to go in front of the city council, is sometime July.
Okay.
So that will address the quote-unquote 5G.
Okay.
Their proposals are usually dealing with, in some of the bigger cities, putting them on these smaller antenna with a big box structure, or some box structure at the base of it, but the antenna sits up on the light poles.
Yeah, because I'd be curious to learn. I've done a little bit of research, tried to read a little bit more on 5G. Sounds like it's awesome as far as speeds go, but that they're extremely powerful and have a lot of radiation. And so as far as bringing them closer to people, I'd be curious to know what research or what studies or what do you guys, how do you determine, are they safe to bring into a community?
I don't know if 5G is necessarily synonymous with the small cell or not. It is.
That's how they have to run it.
Okay,
The larger towers do communicate with smaller towers, these small cells, but most of the traffic is headed through the small cells.
and what I do understand about that, and like Mr. Sant said, we'll talk more about this in some coming meeting, probably sooner than later. Part of the requirement to have a functional 5G network is to have a number of the facilities dispersed throughout the community. And I think this is a situation where have not faced with the technology to the extent that, for example, just 2 years ago, Utah State Code, like other state laws in other states, have been changed largely to take regulatory control away from a city like Spanish Fork. So the state law defines what the particular provider can do, and we have very little ability to dictate what they do, where they do it, and how they do it, to the extent even, I believe, that we're required to allow them to place facilities on public facilities in certain cases, and to do things that, frankly, I wouldn't have imagined that we'd have to be willing to do, or that we'd be
But
compelled to
because of
do,
state law,
but
cities get locked into that.
Yes,
Stuck
we
having
are
to-
subject to state law and federal law. There was an FCC order put out last year that shortened some of the timeframes cities have to look at things. So, so what the idea or what the issue was nationally is get your ordinances in place. We're a little slow behind it because we haven't had anybody, we had one, but it kind of faded away. So we haven't had anybody approach as of yet. We do have a number of these sites, but not any of the small ones yet.
that's a hot topic when it comes to local land use control and just the impact that these facilities might have on a neighborhood.
Yeah. Commissioners have any other questions before we go into public hearing? Okay, we're going to go ahead and go into public hearing. If there's anyone from the audience that would like to comment on these 3 cell towers? Anyone at all? Okay. We will go out of public hearing, and is there any other questions? If not, we'd entertain a motion. It sounds like we want to make a motion on each of those individually.
have any more questions, I can make a motion that we approve the conditional use permit on 300 East 2019 cell tower modification.
Okay, got a motion. Do we hear a second? Got a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, wanna do the next one as well?
I'll let somebody else have the opportunity.
Yeah?
Unless you want me to, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, you're on a roll.
I'm on a roll. All right, I'll make the motion that we approve the 500 South 2019 cell tower modification.
Okay, we have a second? Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
And I'll make another motion that we approve the 1150 East 2019 cell tower modification proposal.
Do we have the same second? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, all three of those were approved. Mr. Anderson? Looks like we're on to the ADU.
Once again, Mr. Chairman, thank you. We've spent a lot of time talking about the possibility of Spanish Fork City changing its regulations for accessory apartments, we might call them accessory dwelling units. So much time that I think there is a certain amount of fatigue that many of us and much of the community has relative to the topic. So I'm going to be as succinct tonight as I can. As I just touch briefly again on the specifics of the proposal, then we as staff will touch on some of the concerns or questions that the Planning Commission raised when we talked about this in May. And then we'll be available for any additional discussion or to answer any questions that you might have. We have not held a public hearing yet on these proposed changes, so that has been noticed. That's on your agenda, and we'd certainly love for you to open up the forum tonight for that part of the meeting as well. The image that we have here describes the nuts and bolts of the proposal. So just take it from the top really quickly. First of all, you can see the two columns, current requirements and proposed changes. You'll note that the owner occupancy requirement does not change. For us, an accessory dwelling unit or an accessory apartment by definition involves having the property owner live on premise. And again, there's no proposal to change that. Also, no proposal to change the number of accessory dwelling units that can be had on a property. Today it's one. This proposal would leave that at one. The amount of off-street parking that's required, the language that's in front of you would require the same amount of off-street parking as what's currently required. I'll circle back just in a moment to talk about that in a little bit more detail. But again, what you have leaves that the same. So now to start to talk about some of the changes. Today we only allow accessory apartments in two different zones in the city, the R3 and the R16 zones. Those are mostly found in the older part of the we think there is good reason to allow for accessory apartments in most of the residential zones that we have in the community. So from R3 all the way up to R115. As you can see there under the proposed changes column. Right now, the minimum lot size that's required for an accessory apartment is 10,000 square feet. 8,000 square feet, I don't think necessarily is a magic number, but I think it's a practical next step to take in terms of being more accommodating of accessory apartments. The science is certainly not precise or exact. A lot of just the actual facts of whether somebody's property can accommodate accessory apartment or not will have to do with, maybe where the home is located on a property. If you can picture this, for example, a rambler that might take up a lot of square footage and therefore make it harder to provide the required parking. You might even have a 10,000 square foot lot and have a hard time spatially providing the parking that's required. Or you might have a 6,000 square foot lot and have a two-story home or something like that that simply uses the lot space more efficiently and still have room to provide the off-street parking. So I'll admit that the 8,000 square feet is probably not a perfect number, but I do think it's a very rational and logical next step to make as we're simply trying to be more accommodating than we have been in the past. And I'm sort of suggesting with that maybe in the future there would be another appropriate reason to talk about changing that further. But right now we're proposing at 8,000 square feet. Building code issues, we'll talk more about that in just a minute. And I think the way that we have this phrased here actually is a little bit misleading. With the proposed changes, people will be required to meet building codes, period. However, I do think that there is good reason, we've had considerable discussion on this topic, to provide our experts with the city enough latitude to practically apply building code requirements, given the very broad range of situations that we have in the community. Again, just to recap a little bit, of course, we're talking in some cases about maybe structures that are 100 years old, and somebody's ability to have a safe accessory apartment in that structure. And we're talking about homes maybe that haven't even been built yet, where our building inspectors are reviewing plans for a home and trying to determine what the appropriate way to meet building codes in that situation is, and everything in between. For us, the building code questions, they are simply about safety. And much of the motivation that we have in making these changes is to try to take situations that we know we have in the community today that we think probably are less safe than they should be, and trying to elevate those and to make them more safe. And again, and maybe to say what I'm thinking a little bit differently, I don't think we believe there's necessarily a one-size-fits-all. So I think it'd be possible for us to talk tonight and to predict exactly what we might require in a specific situation. But I do think our approach will change a little bit with the proposed changes and the need to make sure that people are meeting building codes. And I'll leave it at that with the idea that Mr. Little will talk more to that in a minute. Impact fees, today we require applicants to pay impact fees before we'll issue a permit for an accessory apartment. We are proposing that change and that no longer be a requirement. Same with having a separate electrical meter for homes. We think now is the time to change that requirement to no longer
That's a big one.
require it. I think it has been. And then lastly, and this is something that we continue to try to fine tune. I appreciate Mrs. Brenneman, who's here tonight. She's done some work to help us just simply do something as necessary as develop an application for somebody that wants to have an accessory apartment. We do anticipate charging a fee. It will be akin to what we charge businesses in the community, which is $60 a year. And that fee for us, like it is for businesses, will simply cover the time that the city spends, likely on an annual basis, to review how that property is being used, to make sure that, for example, an owner resides on the property, and to make sure there aren't any other things maybe that have changed over the course of a year that would put it afoul of our regulations for accessory apartments. And again, that fee will simply cover staff's time to do that little bit of research before we renew maybe somebody's registration for an accessory apartment or that sort of a thing. And maybe just to talk to that for one more minute relative to the assignment that I took from the discussion that you had in May relative to code enforcement and accessory apartments. That was something that I can't recall who raised on the commission. It's an issue that's come up. It's come up in a lot of different contexts, but in short, I take the questions basically as being, okay, the city's looking at making changes. How can we provide some assurance to the community that indeed people will be required to follow the regulations that we're talking about tonight? And I think that is a great question. That is a very appropriate question. I think it's particularly appropriate because in the past, we really have not done a good job of enforcing regulations relative to occupancy of homes and just accessory apartments in general.
Dave, just real quick, with that, I think it's important to emphasize that enforcement's not necessarily to try and punish or go after the people that are breaking it. In my mind, it's more to protect the neighbors, to make sure that the neighbors don't have parking issues around them or whatever. It's not necessarily to go after the people that might be breaking the code. So just wanted to emphasize that.
I think I see it the same way. Yeah, absolutely. Just by way of providing more information in terms of what staff's doing, We will meet next week with our public safety folks, some of our legal folks, and I think it's going to be a lengthy discussion on exactly what steps we anticipate making with the rollout of this program to try to provide people with incentives to comply with the regulations that we're talking about, and also to talk about the approach that we will take as people fail to comply with the changes. I think very appropriately so, our level of sensitivity in terms of what code enforcement means for people that have accessory apartments. It's high. We're talking about how people use their homes. We're talking about people's homes, as the residents of the accessory apartments. And I think having, that's what I've said before, something of a soft touch as we try to encourage people to comply wherever possible versus trying to cause that use to cease. That's really, I think, the perspective that we're planning on bringing to code enforcement. With that said, I am certain that there, for example, today, are apartments in the community that won't be able to meet these provisions. And we will deal with some very difficult issues and concerns as we work through simply helping people to comply with the regulations. And again, that's something that we're very, very sensitive about. It's not something necessarily that we look forward to dealing with at all, but we're a city. We have responsibilities, and I think the responsibility of enforcing the regulations that the city council adopts is something that we take seriously. And incidentally, I think our elected officials probably will be involved in that process in different ways so that, we can make sure that they're providing their insight relative to how they anticipate us to enforce the regulations, but without being obviously very specific, which is really hard to do. Partly, again, kind of like I said with building codes, every situation I think is going to be a little bit different from some other ones. And I think that's very important to consider and to take into account. But that being said, the differences in situations doesn't change what we're talking about here. The lines are pretty bright here, and that's not by accident. So I think in most cases, it's going to be very easy to say you comply or you don't. And until people do comply, we will have a problem that we will be working through to try to address in a different manner than we've done in the past. So staff, so to speak, I think does have to step up. We have to step up our game to make sure that these changes end up, I think you said it well, they end up not having an adverse impact on neighborhoods. I'd add to that to make sure that these changes perhaps help address some of the current problems that we have in neighborhoods, where maybe there are some apartments that exist that are illegal and don't meet some of these criteria. And, again, for me, like I mentioned also, again, safety being the concern that it is. So from a code enforcement perspective, that's one way to try to make sure that places are appropriately safe. And that's more than I anticipated on saying relative to the changes tonight. There are a couple of other issues that you raised previously. We have Mr. Snyder and Mr. Little here. They can talk to those if you don't mind right fast, and we
Okay.
can just go from there.
You bet.
Okay, thanks.
You getting this paperwork, are you? You getting this paperwork?
Put me a test.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave, maybe something could be worked on as a question after Mr. Little gets done. I'm just curious, do we have a count of how many homes are actually registered now? Maybe even as a baseline as we start this?
Yeah, that's a great question, but no.
Sorry, John.
We've never tracked that before. The thought just came to mind that right now we do require people to have a separate utility account, at least, whether they have a separate meter or not, they pay a separate fee.
Okay,
If they have a second dwelling unit on a property, that would include both duplexes and accessory apartments. We'd have to kind of parse out, those two things to see what that means. But that's probably where I would start to try to answer that question. All I could give you is a guess, though. I don't know how many we have today that are legal and allowed.
Okay.
But there certainly are a number.
yeah. Moving forward, the Community Development Department will handle this. versus the utility office. That's what
Exactly.
changes.
Right, yeah.
With Kim, is that,
I think she gets to be our point person on this.
she's kind
Yeah.
of, she's built the
Yeah.
form, so she's going to be the quarterback.
Well said. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks,
Should be
Kim.
great.
Okay,
We haven't shared a lot with her yet about what that means. I think she probably understands well, but.
okay, thanks.
Thank you for taking a minute with me. As per Dave's request, I put together a handful of different scenarios that we foresee happening with the ADUs. Everything from new construction to something that's been there for, possibly 100 years. The building code is pretty black and white on things. And where we see things coming in new, that's pretty easy to work with, and it's not typically a big undertaking for the applicant to make the changes or to make the construction design necessary to incorporate an ADU. One of the struggles you run into is when you have an older home or an existing home that you either have an ADU in and you're trying to register it and make it as safe as you possibly can, or you're trying to adapt what you have to include an ADU. I put down some thoughts here on the paper I gave you. What we would be looking at first and foremost is just making a accessory apartment or the ADU safe for not only the tenant living in it, but also the original homeowner. There's certain situations where, it might be, you might have a basement apartment or something like that you may not have smoke detectors in, and probably maybe wasn't required at the time, but this would give us the opportunity to come in and maybe use a battery powered smoke detector. That they have technology out that they have wireless interconnectivity to where they can talk to each other without having to cut down sheetrock and make it really difficult for the applicant to incorporate that into the house. But there's all sorts of different scenarios. I'm 100% sure that they are not on this list, and we anticipate taking those as they come and doing the best we can with them. There is not a one-size-fits-all to this situation, but I think I've got a great set of inspectors that are more than capable of making those judgment calls and making a better situation than what we've got. Yeah.
I've got a question for you. So walk me through your process now, where if you go do an inspection, I assume it's generally on new construction right now. Let's say they don't pass the inspection or there's something that they're lacking. What's the timeline? What's the process that they have to go through to be able for you to come back and then approve it?
So on inspection now, let's say they call us out, we do an inspection on it. If they fail the inspection, from that point on, they have 6 months before the permit goes void. The permit is renewed every 6 months, from the time that we did our last inspection. So if we went out and they were finishing their basement and they weren't quite done or something along those lines, the permit's renewed every 6 months after that.
What does the permit allow them to do?
It allows them to whatever the permit was initially designed for, whether it's finishing a basement or a shed or a house or something like that. It allows them to continue doing that work up to the point that they're not covering up or concealing anything before we get to inspect it for code compliance.
So suppose they go ahead and continue and do the work without telling you, they don't take care of whatever the issue was and they finish the basement, or they're converting an existing home to an ADU and you come out and they don't have smoke detectors in the basement and they never put those in. Walk me through that process.
So If they don't ever make contact with us again, the permit will, one, it will expire. And two, if in a situation like the ADUs, if they still want to stay registered with the city, we would have to get that's inspection resolved. In a situation like this, we would try to work with them to open up sections of the wall maybe that was concealed at one point. If, like you said, they didn't install the smoke detectors, there's technology out there and systems in place where we can work with that and use a wireless battery operated system that could work in that situation. If they just completely fall off the face of the earth and we never hear from them again, when the application is when the permit's ready to expire, we have office staff that reaches out to them and tries to make contact with them, let them know that it's going to be expiring, and to try to get that permit renewed and finalized at some point.
As I went through your scenarios, there are some things that aren't covered here that I just would like a clarification on. You've got down here a separation, a 1 hour fire rating separation between the units. Is that going to be enforced in existing homes that, it might be adding, a layer of sheetrock to the ceiling or something, but anyway, is that going to, there are 3 things that I looked at here that I hadn't seen. One of them was the fire rating, the separate HVAC system, and the separate water connections, and the separate separate HVAC, didn't I?
Yes.
So those are the ones that I didn't see up here. Are they going to be required for all of the ADUs, or only those new ones? Or?
No, that would only be in a situation of new construction where the applicant wants a solid barrier in between the two units. So if you have that solid barrier, you're actually creating more or less a duplex, and so the building code won't allow you to have that without that 1 hour separation there. If you have a door or a hallway between the two to where the two spaces are interconnected like that, it's still just treated as a single family dwelling, and you wouldn't have to have that fire separation there or the separate HVAC systems. If you wanted to have that separation there, the building code does require you to have separate HVAC systems, so you're not sharing that air between the two.
Water connections as well, same?
Yeah, on that, on new construction, it's easy to set it up to where each tenant has controls of their own system. In existing construction, we'd just make sure that each tenant, each occupant has access to those, whether it's a breaker panel or the main water disconnect for, in case of emergency, you have a plumbing failure or something like that, they can get to that device and shut it off without flooding the.
Thanks, John.
So I have a question, but it's actually directed to Dave. Dave, you can stay there, but I just need you to, could you give me your best guess estimate of how many number of homes with this zone, or these changes to ADUs, how many total homes might be able to have an ADU? Eligible, that's the word I was hoping for, thank you.
I'd guess that 60% of the community.
So we have about
Right now,
11,000 doors, I think. 60% of those could be potentially have an ADU. Thank you.
Yes, so
Okay, thank you.
6,000.
Wow. Okay. That HVAC system separation actually shows up on the first 3 scenarios, and just wondering if is that going to be enforced that way? That's as big a deal as separating electrical that they did away with in this.
At this point, we see if you've got that separation there, or you can do it where on new construction, you can either have separate HVAC systems, or, you know, you could have, the main floor to have, HVAC, and the basement or something like that could, we have something as simple as some baseboard heaters or electric heat, something like that.
So
That's-
scenario 3 is actually an existing home converting to ADU.
Yeah, at this point, we were anticipating and making that separation there, where it does have where they would be installing a separation for on the existing houses.
So separation, with no separation meaning no hallway, no way to access the two. If they had that access, I guess that moves to scenario 4,
Correct.
and that's where you don't need that separate HVAC. Okay.
Correct.
It's when they want that complete separation that is actually going to create more work in some of the trades.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay?
The requirements become more stringent.
Yeah,
Yeah,
That's how I look at it.
yeah. Okay? I think that's all I have. Any other questions for John? No? Okay.
Hey, Dave, I have one quick question. Do you have a feel for how many homes per year in the last 5 years have been built in Spanish Fork? Like how many homes per year we're adding, maybe
242 year average going back 5 years.
242, best ballpark?
Best guess, yeah.
Or Brandon can run a number for
I'm
me.
not that far off, I'll bet, with that.
200,
I will check since you asked.
242?
Yeah,
For a
it's
year?
probably on that order. Yeah, I think last year we were well over 300, but the years before. we've
Average.
been Down a little bit. Going back 20 years, kind of interesting, we've been really, really close to 300 per year, so.
Okay.
Maybe just to add a couple of things to what John said, and you might not anticipate or believe how much time John has spent researching how to deal with the building code side of this issue. Lots of other things are really, really easy, like I said, to have really bright lines on, to be very clear and specific about. I think to some extent the building code side of dealing with accessory dwelling units, it's a little bit more difficult. I don't mean to speak for John at all or to steal any of his thunder, but we've spent a considerable amount of time trying to understand how other communities have approached it from this perspective.
Yeah.
And I think what John has described really is our understanding of what is best practice in the industry and how
That's-
they've dealt with it in such a way that people just don't throw their hands up in the air
Yeah.
and continue to operate illegally, because there's no hope for being able to separate out, the power between two different units, or the water, or to do the 1 hour firewall, or to do the separate HVAC. I think it's pretty easy to see how those types of improvements would just completely disincent anybody from
Yeah.
trying to be compliant. So, and again, also there's a balance between what we're requiring of people and what's needed to make it safe, and we're really trying to focus again on that safety aspect.
That's good. That's no sense of reinventing the process. So looking at other communities and,
There's quite a wide range of what communities do.
yeah,
Everything from just turn a blind eye to it and let people do what they will, and to creating rules and having to enforce things that aren't in the building code. It's it was quite eye-opening.
okay, thank you. Did Mr. Snyder have something to present as well?
Just briefly,
We can't let him off too easy.
good evening and thank you for being here. I appreciate you guys coming and giving me a chance to chat with you. As Dave started off with, we have been going over this quite a bit. A lot of information, a lot of feedback, a lot of meetings. Just to remind you, what action you take here tonight will be passed on to the city council for June 18th. It will be considered at their meeting on that date. We do still have all the information available online, as well as the Facebook Live.
that Dave Anderson and Scott Aylett presented recently. Really great sources of information. The one thing that I was asked to look at from our last meeting was, does having the accessory apartment change the way a home is taxed, or does it increase the taxes? I did have a chance to chat with our Utah County Assessor's Office. As far as the first part of the question, it does not. It would still be designated as a residential. And if it's a owner-occupied primary residence, then it still qualifies for the tax exemptions up to 45%. The second part of the question, is there a potential increase? That one was answered, yes, it can, but they're not necessarily changes from the ADU. It's more changes associated with preparing for the ADU. And a lot of those are similar to if someone were to remodel their home or do an addition onto their home. So if you think through, someone buys a home, they remodel it, maybe they refinish the basement to become an ADU, they may see that increase due to the fact that they've improved the condition of the home. The second one scenario that they shared was the change in size. And so if you purchase a home or have a home and you do an addition off the rear of the home, whether it's for an ADU or another bedroom or a family room, you're going to see that increase in square footage, which would then see a change in your assessment. The biggest thing that they indicated to us right now, as you're all aware, is just the market fluctuations as far as changes. The other thing I wanted to touch on real briefly, in the proposal before you tonight, there is one thing that we kind of glossed over that we wanted to draw your attention to. So on page 3 of the memo, there is a section that's subtitled Accessory Apartments. If you look at 2B, what we're proposing to add is what can be considered a temporary leave of absence. And so there we've got listed if it's for 3 years or less, and it's related to a temporary job assignment, a sabbatical, or voluntary service, then basically what they can do is come to the city, get approval for that leave of absence, and then during that short period of time, that unit that was occupied by the owner can then be occupied by family, or it could be somebody unrelated to the family, but it is for those defined reasons and for that short period of time. And there is the qualification in the heading above that the owner does have to have previously resided at the property for at least 1 year. And I believe, if there's no questions on that, I believe there is one other clarification we need to make as far as the parking. And I'll let Dave.
I have one question about that.
Uh-huh.
That you stated that the owner must have lived there for 1 year. If there was a person who bought a home that has, for instance, already has an outside entrance for the basement and stuff, and moves into the home with the idea that he can have an ADU downstairs that helps with the mortgage that he's going to have, he wouldn't be able to do that for 1 year until after he's lived in? So he can't move in and advertise that
Correct.
apartment for rent for at least 1 year?
Correct.
I might not have understood that last part that you mentioned correctly. Somebody
Say that again?
could move in to a home and immediately be eligible to use an accessory apartment or to provide an accessory apartment on premise.
But they wouldn't qualify for the leave of absence
But they
until
wouldn't
after a
qualify
year.
for
wouldn't
leave of
cle-
absence
okay,
for
yeah.
a year.
Okay.
Is that how you understood it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there yeah, that makes sense, thank you. On
that
B,
clarification.
on B2, is there a time frame on that? The owner's placed in hospital?
We probably should clarify, but I would assume it's the same 3 years or less. Is that?
That's the intent of how we have it written now.
Okay. You may want to add that.
Yeah, I may want to add it to
Agreed. I just
subsection
add 3
2
years
or
right
move
to
the
it.
3 years up to the main paragraph of B. That's a good catch, thank you.
And the other one was parking?
Same page.
Yeah, so the parking is on page 5 of that same memo, under off-street parking number 3. And I understand the way it's currently proposed, and Dave will speak to a conversation he had with our city administrator, but the way it's currently proposed is that tandem parking would be considered. But I hear that we have some current feedback on that, so I'll turn the time back over to Dave.
So my hope here is just to kind of clarify some things that staff's talking about. I really don't want to derail the discussion on this and to get off on too great of a tangent, but we will go as far as you'd like to tonight in terms of discussing the thought. Tandem parking, just to be clear about what that is, it's very customary for homes to have two-car garages and space in the driveway, you could maybe say in front of that garage, for two cars as well. So the cars would be parked in front of and behind one another. That's tandem parking, the way that we would define it. So that scenario that I just described, two-car garage and driveway space for two cars, that would accommodate 4 cars and therefore meet our current requirements and what's proposed. Don't mean to put this on the city manager necessarily at all, but he and I have been talking about whether there's value in requiring an additional parking space when the parking's configured that way. When there's tandem parking space, the idea is that, well, perhaps we should require a 5th space, if you will, just because sometimes that functional issue of arranging cars and really being able to use all 4 spaces for 2 different families living on a property can be a challenge. So one way that that would be accomplished, I would guess very commonly, would be, again, if you can picture 2 cars in the garage, 2 cars in the driveway, and perhaps we require somebody to pour the 8 feet of concrete, maybe next to that driveway then, next to the driveway and the property line, I think is typically how that would be, to provide a 5th parking space. And that's what we've been talking about, just whether we should add that to the language that we're talking about tonight. If that's something that you'd like to weigh in on, we'd certainly appreciate any thoughts that you have. If it's something you don't care about, then we'll continue to, I guess, maybe discuss that, I'll just say as staff, and would come up with some perhaps alternate to what's proposed tonight before it's presented to the city council in a couple of weeks.
My only concern is I don't want people to turn their front yards into concrete. So I think if they have 4 one way or another that works within their guidelines, I think it's fine.
I would,
We heard that concern
Concur
in
with that.
focus group discussions, that, we did hear that.
So I got a question
I
about
just-
number 8. No part of any vehicle may overhang onto a public sidewalk or within 5 feet of a street curb where no sidewalk exists. What's the time limit on that? How does that get looked at? Because I imagine if you've got 4 cars and 2 in the garage, 2 in the front, somebody comes to visit real quick, maybe they don't park on the street, they just pull up behind and they leave it there for a few hours. Are cops going around? Are they looking for that? I mean, how's that gonna be even looked at, or?
That's funny that you ask about that. And honestly, I don't think that's an accessory apartment issue at all. That's an issue that we have just in neighborhoods, period. And I think this is an issue that we've struggled with as a
I've
community.
seen it. We've got some neighborhoods where you've got a big long truck and you pull up to the garage and you're, like it or not, you're blocking the sidewalk.
And we've had, a common issue has been fifth wheels that hang out across the sidewalk, kids riding bikes, catching their heads on the, what do you call it, hitch? That's what we call it, a fifth wheel, different things like that. We rely on our police department as officers are patrolling to look out for that type of thing. And, typically it's just a conversation with the property owner to say, hey, you need to move this.
So this
This
isn't
we're not-
necessarily new to ADUs.
This is
something
not,
we're looking at right now.
exactly. So the idea of being able to obstruct a sidewalk in any way, or to have a vehicle, is I think in every situation that we're talking about here, the sidewalk is part of the public right-of-way. So, having a vehicle park over you know, any part of that right of way except legally being parked in the street. That's something that's not permitted.
So that line, that number 8, is probably somewhere else in the code anyway.
It is, yeah.
Just kind of reiterated here.
And I think from our perspective, it's important to have here as well, just in terms of being able to define what a parking space is.
Yes.
So for example, particularly with that tandem parking, and there aren't very many developments in the community that have less than 20 feet. Most, in fact, have 25 feet from a garage door to a sidewalk. But there are some where literally there's not enough space in a driveway to park a car without hanging out either into the street or into the sidewalk. So being able to sit down with somebody and make sure that if they want to count tandem parking space, that indeed it's deep enough to function. I think that's why, in part, that provision's important.
Good clarification.
So Dave, mine's not a question, but if it's okay, I've got a kind of a recommendation or potential for ADUs, for us to have a goal. Because I think goals are good, Dave. So here's why I ask these questions. So if we have 11,000 dwelling units, 60% gives us 6,600, just rough numbers. If we get 2% of those to add ADUs, that gives 132 per year. And if we could get 132 per year times 5 years, that's 660 more affordable housing units in our community in the next 5 years. To me, that'd be a good goal, because if we don't get that, we're not making any progress, and all this time we're spending on this really isn't worthwhile. Because we want to get more affordable housing or attainable housing in our community. So I would like to invite our city to consider, as we're doing all this, to set the goal to have so many units in 5 years, or a year or 2 years, and if we don't get them, we might have too tight of restrictions. So I think in general, landowner or homeowners really want to have this as a potential. So I'm just throwing that out there as a potential goal to see how we're doing.
I like that. I like that a lot. And certainly, and I didn't spend any time at all talking about the potential benefits of having accessory apartments. What you just described is a big one. I think there's some other ones as well, but that certainly is a really big one. I don't know if you or I necessarily will remember this. You're more likely to remember it than me, I'm afraid. But sometime in October or November, hopefully before December, we'll be talking about the city's moderate income housing plan. And that indeed is a document that we submit to the state on an annual basis now that talks about what our goals are to provide affordable housing, and having what you just said be in that document articulated very clearly that, you know, we made these changes with the idea of being able to increase the city's supply of affordable housing units by 600 units, whatever that number is, over 5 years. That's textbook, right, Brandon, in terms of what the state expects us to think through and describe relative to how we would provide affordable housing,
So
or
that'd be
allow for
perfect.
it, maybe I'd say.
Because if we're adding that and we're adding our 242 a year for the next 5 years, that'll give us.
235, by the way, if we went back 4
All
years.
right, well, I'm sticking with the numbers I already have. So
Okay.
that'll give us about 5% increase in 5 years of overall housing. It'd be great.
Yeah. Yep.
There you go. I don't know how we make it happen, but that'd be my recommendation.
Well, this is a big step towards that. You're
Yep.
just making it
It
more
is.
permissible. There's one other thing that I need to touch on. We've talked about this before, but just for clarity's sake, particularly with the hard copy, the grade text, I think, jumps out. I think there is a lot of value in continuing to discuss the prospect of allowing accessory apartments or accessory dwelling units in detached structures. But I don't think we're quite ready to make that change tonight. And rather than to slow down everything else while we maybe iron out some of the details on that issue, staff's recommending that we move forward without considering M, and then that part of C on page 3 that would allow for that. But frankly, we'd like to be discussing that in upcoming months so that, you know, maybe still in 2019, we come back with some changes that would work for that.
Great.
Okay. I wonder if we ought to address the parking, the tandem question, just so the city council understands the planning commission's feelings on this. We've got a couple that was, myself and Commissioner Argyle, that was maybe not in favor of adding a fifth spot in that situation. How does the other commissioners feel on that? Just so the council understands how we feel.
Feel similar, I don't think it should be required. I think 4 should be enough along street parking. Some instances, you'll have them go ahead and add a concrete pad to add additional, but I don't think it's necessary to require that. I think 4 is a good number.
Thank you.
I don't think that addition of the fifth parking stall will have much effect. It seems like when you put another parking stall on the side of a house, it becomes a trailer parking area or a RV parking area. And so I think it's just an added expense that may not be worth the effort.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Davis?
Feel about the same way. My questions on this go back to 2 things. Advertisement to the zones that you're going to add to, and enforcement. Them are my 2 big deals. You can add all you want to this and what you're going to do, but my deal is how you're going to let everybody know in all the new zones what we're doing and what we're changing and how you're going to enforce it. That's big. So you answer them to me. Tell me how you were doing it. And I can start telling you all the fun stuff I'd like to see in it.
Yeah.
But I think them are the two big crucial questions on this whole thing.
I think I agree. Not surprised that you picked the easy ones to talk about.
I just
They're
think
the
public-
challenges.
I just think if you're gonna bring all this up and you have not reached all the houses in in the R19, R112, R115 and all that, you're gonna have the biggest meeting that you've ever had in your life when that comes out. And then all of a sudden you're changing things again, to make things right. So we want to get it right the first time. But I want to hear, because you're gonna get, I can see some people right here, right now, that do not want this, not at all. Not in my neighborhood. That's why I bought this house.
Yeah,
It's okay with the R3 and the R16, but don't you put this in my neighborhood, and it's not fair that you're letting all these people put them in these other zones right now, because I built my house not to be there. I want to know why, how we gonna bring this up? And I know what the state's trying to do and everything else, but the bottom line, and then the other thing is the enforcement. I'm really worried about the enforcement and the codes and that will bring into it, and fire restrictions and everything else are putting safety features on other families. So anyway, that's my concerns.
let me try to just give my thoughts, and I'm not gonna pretend like I have all the answers, on really any level. I will say that I think we've been as thorough on those 2 questions as we possibly could have been as a city. So maybe to start with just kind of the concept of how do we get the word out? We've spent a lot of time over the course of the entire past year, and we've had the benefit of being able to use some city resources that are outstanding. We have a public information officer today that is as good as anybody in the state, and he's been very helpful to do a handful of different things that have been atypical for us to do. They're more common, I think, for other communities to do. We had, and I'll use this word probably repeatedly, a pretty robust effort to solicit input by way of a public survey, and the response that we got statistically was very strong. 400 or so respondents to a multi-question survey about everything from concerns that somebody might have with accessory apartments to things that they might view as benefits, changes that they'd feel comfortable seeing made, changes that they didn't want to see made. The response that we got to that was not only good in terms of the quantity, but the quality of responses that we got was wonderful. And incidentally, if anybody cares, that's all on the city's website right now. You can go and I believe even read the text that we got from people as they took time to give us, in some cases, several paragraphs of their thoughts about the benefits or problems that come with accessory apartments. And without a doubt, none of us would be surprised, right, that there are two different trains of thought. Some people are very, very comfortable with the idea of allowing for more accessory apartments in the community. Some people hate it. And I'm not sure that in my mind necessarily, that proportion matters. Typically it does though, and the strong majority of people that responded to the survey feel like the city should loosen up, I'd say, and be more permissive and allow for more accessory apartments. From my perspective, hearing from the folks that have concerns though was really important in terms of trying to understand what those concerns are. And I'd say there were two primary things that really jumped out. Neither of them, again, I'd say is a surprise. One, parking. The concerns that people have are tenants or maybe visitors to properties that have accessory apartments parking in front of their home in the street. People don't like that. And it's legal, it's allowed, people don't like that, and we heard that. I think we heard it loud and clear, and maybe from that perspective, we should look at changing our standards, but I think it's important to remember that many of the people that responded relative to concerns that they have with accessory apartments that exist today in their neighborhoods, I think the vast majority of those accessory apartments aren't legal. So I would hope that some of the steps that we're taking now would help to ease, just the
Sure.
impact that they're having. But the other thing that I want to mention in terms of concern, it's duplexes. It's properties that really aren't accessory dwellings. It's situations where the owner doesn't reside on premise. And I think communities have been able to demonstrate over time and in lots of different parts of the country that a duplex ends up impacting a neighborhood very differently than an accessory apartment does. When the owner resides there, things just work differently. The impact on the neighborhood is less, typically. And that kind of ties into the other part of the question that you asked that came through the survey. I would say, from the people that are concerned about allowing for more accessory apartments, and it was, how does the city propose to enforce the regulations that we're talking about? And again, I tried to kind of talk through how I view that right now, and I maybe wish I could be more specific than I can right now, but in short, the city needs to come up with a way to make sure that people that are using properties with more than one dwelling unit conform to these requirements. And I think there is complete buy-in from the city administrative office, community development, our legal office, and our public safety folks to do whatever it takes to make sure that people conform to the requirements. And it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. But we certainly can't be as passive as we've been in the past. I think everybody understands that. And the outcome needs to be conformity to the regulations. So that could be everything from the equivalent of a fix-it ticket that eventually leads maybe to a family getting ordered by a judge to leave a property, to just simply helping somebody understand what the process is to get an accessory apartment approved by the city and therefore to become legal. I think we'd see a wide variety of scenarios play out as we deal with properties on a case-by-case basis, but it's an important issue. I appreciate you emphasizing it. And again, I wish maybe I could be more specific, but every case is going to be different.
I can see, I can really see, we talked about the concrete pads and everything else, and so somebody has to put a new concrete pad in, and there's landscape requirements through all these other subdivisions, and all of a sudden there's a big old gob of concrete in front of it, and people all of a sudden don't like it, so we say, okay, well, let's not do that. And so now you've got parking along the side of the street, and people don't like that, and gee, I can just see a lot of things building up in there, and
Yeah.
There is that potential, but I think this is a good step in the right direction of getting something that we can live with, a starting point. There's been a lot of research, the surveys, and a lot of this document has been founded on a lot of that input. A lot of these changes and some things that didn't change, it gives us a starting point. Because what we do know is there's a lot of illegal activity going on, and has been for a long time. So if we do nothing at all, it's going to continue same old. This will at least give us a good document. We've tried to improve it, make it easier, and it gives us a starting point. Doesn't mean that in 6 months or a year we're going to be revisiting some issues, Richard, that may come up from this, whether it's parking or enforcement or, you know, maybe some of the inspections are too stringent or whatever, but it does give us a starting point to get people working towards being legal and conforming.
Dave, how long can a car stay parked on the street without moving?
I was told 72 hours earlier today. If it's a legally registered operable vehicle, 72 hours.
The license is expired, or
Yeah.
registration, or whatever, doesn't say anything.
Yep.
I have a question or a comment that's relative to what Brad was talking about. Has there been much discussion with staff about how to incentivize those people who have an ADU at this point in time, and obviously they're not legal, but what's the incentive? How do we incentivize them to come in and gladly give you $60 and open themselves up to an inspection and, you know, have the possibility of having to change something that's been going on for maybe with an elderly person for 30 years? Have we thought about how we're going to do that and how we're going to make them understand the change that we have and the reason that we're changing it?
I stopped a little bit short of describing the different things that we did to involve the public in preparing this document. We did some other things, focus group meetings and different things like that. But I think we completely anticipate, probably taking time to consistently share the message to the community about this program, if it gets adopted. And I think the most important thing that we can do is help people understand that there is a path to having a legal accessory apartment. And I think with what we're talking about tonight, the majority of the folks in the community that would want to do that could. And that's part of I think that's an important part of what we're working on, is developing something that makes it possible for somebody to have that maybe apartment that they've had for 30 years be a legal apartment in the community. So that's what I would start with, which is, hey, good news is you can have an accessory apartment, but you need to do X, Y, and Z, pay $60, for example, in order to be legal in Spanish Fork. Beyond that, it's going to be compulsion. It's going to be, if you want to continue to use your property with an accessory apartment, you need to do X, Y, and Z. You don't have a choice, and the carrot that gets dangled out then is it's the opportunity to continue to have an accessory apartment, which I think is a very significant incentive. But I don't want to sound silly, but it's not like necessarily we would anticipate being able to say, hey, if you come in the next year, we'll give you $100, or anything to that extent. That might be a more traditional kind of an incentive to give somebody a reason to come forward. There are some communities, I think, that have done some creative things in terms of maybe trying to accelerate the process of having people become legal. I've used the word amnesty. We found a program that another community has used that indeed did that. They gave people a year and a half or 2 years to apply for the city's approval of an accessory dwelling unit, and during that period of time, I think they waived fees. I think they offered certain variances to different codes and things like that, and that was an incentive. And I think that's maybe worth talking about as well in terms of maybe trying to accelerate things. But ultimately, it's a matter of if you want to continue to use your property, you need to do this. And that's the thing that hopefully causes action.
So do you envision us having an apartment czar at some point in time that is going to go out and actually knock on doors?
Yeah.
I don't want that job.
Kim does a great job of keeping track of businesses that are legal and not legal in the community and helping businesses understand what they need to do to operate legally in the community. She keeps track of all kinds of information about everybody that has a business license in Spanish Fork. We review that information annually, and that process doesn't just involve Kim in terms of making sure that things are being done right. There's really a deep supporting cast that involves everything from our building inspectors to our code enforcement officer that's a sworn officer of the peace, to a fire code official, to occasionally Brandon or I, providing help as well. So probably not a czar, but there certainly will be a point of contact. It's the most friendly point of contact that we have in our office. I think the easiest person to talk to and to work with. And it's worked in another context, and I think it could work really well here.
How's the commission feel about going into a public meeting? Not done that yet? Okay. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Knows it's helped us so far. Brandon? Little. Okay, we're going to open this meeting up for a public meeting. And this is a time, if you want to chime in on this topic, to come forward, introduce yourself, and we'll listen.
I'll have something to say. My name's Andrew Kelly.
Okay?
I'm a new resident, and I live in an R. Dave Fieldstone Legacy Farms. What is that? R 112. And just, I was going to say the brother over here, but Davis, just for his benefit, I've been in the state and the city less than a year, and I knew about this. They reached out to me, so somehow I got in, and I was actually at a round table, and I think Dave has researched this, more than anything I can imagine probably in the city. One thing that I think that you touched on, but I have an unfinished basement, so I'm not, I don't have a dog in the fight right now, but like what you mentioned, sure, the fact that I can afford a home here doesn't make me any better than someone that can't afford a home here. And if it does reach a point where I do want to do that, then yeah, I have an interest in helping someone out, and plus myself, obviously. But one thing, I think there's no secret, the leave of absence thing, I think there's no secret where the 3 years came from, being that we live in Utah and Spanish Fork. And I think you kind of touched on it, but I do see a scenario there. Of course, it wouldn't affect me in several years, but someone else, let's say, look, you said someone moves in today to a house that has a legal apartment. And again, this is no secret. We all know the possibility of, certainly not me, but any one of you maybe get a call to be a mission president. So they can't, that's for 3 years, right? They can't, so they're not allowed to, they've only been there a month. They had no control over that. So being there a year or whatnot. So, but beyond that, I don't know, I just think that I can just speak for the people that I think you're saying, that's where I live, that are probably, there will be people against that, but I would just give my voice that I'm with you. We need to love our neighbor, right? So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, yeah. Hello.
Hello, my name is Dennis Bernard. You've seen me here before, and I've been involved in some of these focus group meetings. I need just a little bit of education to start out with. These permitted zones, all those numbers get thrown around, and for most of us, we have no clue what those mean. Could somebody define those? At least the residential ones, I don't know. All of those are the R, residential.
Yeah, residential starts with the R. The higher the number, the larger the lot. Typically, the larger the size. The lower the number, typically the lower the lot, the
lot.
higher the density.
So it does not necessarily mean the geographic block within the city.
It does, yes, and
Ties into that.
Because I'm on a huge lot. But that happened by happenstance when the development took place, so.
Yeah, I guess if
The
you
best
look in
way
the
to
older
answer-
part of town,
yeah, and simply relative to what's being considered, maybe to focus on that, we're talking about every residential property in the city. You know, with
So we're
8,000
opening
square
it
feet
up,
or greater,
every residential property in the city, we're opening
with
up
a
to
few
auxiliary
exceptions,
units.
But that's the idea, yes.
Okay, and I agree with Councilman or whatever Davis here, that if people who are living in single-family neighborhoods and built their homes there, thinking that that was the zoning, which is what I did, and I chose that specifically because I wanted to live in a single-family dwelling, do not understand at all what is being discussed here and what the ramifications are probably going to be. Because they move in thinking that these are single families. I did, and now I've got duplexes all around me, basically. 2 houses across the street, there's now 4 families, there's 10 cars, 2 big flatbed trailers, a recreational vehicle. There's no parking for all of that. And so I think people are not understanding. I don't know whether that's a communication, an advertisement thing, whether things need to go out in the city newsletter that comes out with the utility bills or whatever. But I could see, like you say, this room could be packed and out into the halls if people realize that now the city is saying you conform to certain rules and regulations, you can turn your basement into an apartment. And that can happen anywhere in the city. So that just negates the idea that you can choose a section of the city to live in because you want certain zoning to be a part of that. So I think that's something very, parking, that's been my big push, and some of my neighbors are the same thing there. And enforcement, I think, is a big thing, and boy, that's a can of worms. I'm glad you guys can take care of it. Because things have changed in my neighborhood, and the city knows nothing about what's going on. All of a sudden, a truck pulls up every Saturday with another load of 2x4s and sheetrock, and then there's a new family in the neighborhood. And the city isn't aware of that at all. And how that gets enforced, I don't know, but I applaud what has been done so far. I think there's been a lot of excellent thinking going into it, a lot of excellent ideas on how it might be approached, what needs to be done as far as safety and building codes and all of that sort of thing. But yeah, I still want to live in a single-family neighborhood, but it's no longer that anymore, and it probably never will change, so.
Thank you, Dennis. Anyone else from the public that would like to chime in on this?
Hi,
Hi.
Kedrick Black. And I would just kind of probably same comments that Richard Davis had, just concerns of enforcement, parking, some of those things, and hopefully you just really take that into consideration as you do it. I know there's some streets, even around the town, you try to drive down them and there's cars parked on each side of the road and you can get one car down through them. And it just seems like I see that more and more as I drive around town. That's concerning when you have kids playing and those type of things. So just from a safety aspect. And so I think parking needs to be addressed definitely as you look into this. And And then I would agree with Dennis on some of the zoning. You know, you move into a place thinking that you're gonna be in a single family area, and then now those are changing. And I hadn't heard about this. I came for another, another issue, but that is a concern that I have also. Anyway, I know there's also push to make more affordable housing. I understand that too, so, anyway.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Anyone else? Last chance. Okay, we're going to close the public hearing. Has the commissioners got all their questions answered? Any other comments from the commissioners? Before I ask if there's a recommendation. So again, we'd be making, if we get a recommendation for proposed changes to the accessory apartment regulations that would go to the city council on June 18th. Brandon, I believe you mentioned. There'll be another opportunity for the public. That'll also be a public hearing. This group makes recommendations to the city council. We don't actually vote on it to go in or not. So, commissioners, anybody want to make a recommendation?
I'll make a motion that we recommend this to be reviewed by the city council. Is that proper?
You're recommending for approval to this?
Well, for them to review.
To approve. Okay. So we got a motion. You got a second?
The motion is to recommend to the city council that these changes be approved? Is that what I understood?
Yes.
I'll second it.
Okay, we got a motion and a seconded. All in favor, and let's do a roll call, starting with Richard.
Nay.
Yay.
Yay.
Yay?
Aye, or yay?
Okay. All right. Thank you for your comments from the public. It's good to see you come up and mention your concerns.
Thank you.
All right. The next thing on the agenda is a preliminary plat for Legacy Townhomes. Brandon, you going to present that?
Must be a Salisbury.
Oh.
Yeah. We should take a recess, but I don't think you'd appreciate that. If we can go to the interactive map briefly. Hopefully everybody has had a chance to see the full packet that was included on the website. The link was emailed out to you. What we're looking at, let me find a page that I'm looking for. If we can go ahead and turn on the zoning, Mike, thank you. So you're correct, Chairman Tanner. We are looking at a preliminary plat tonight. This is in the Legacy Farms master plan, and so if we were to zoom out, you would kind of see the whole area that we're considering as part of the Legacy Farms. Let's zoom back into here. So the area that's zoned R3, we currently already have the zoning in place, and the agreement that's already in place as well dictated the type of, the number of units and density that were proposed. In that it called out for a max of 170 units on the acreage that's currently in the R3 zone.
170?
170,
Okay.
correct. And so Salisbury has been working diligently with staff, and the product that we've got for you here tonight is for review and a recommendation of approval. And what we've got next on the agenda kind of ties to this item as well. We won't jump into it full detail, but it does tie into it. And so one of the considerations is to increase the depth for this potential commercial here. It's already got the C2 zone. By increasing the depth, it would give more options and more viability as far as that developing into usable commercial. And so the plat that's before you tonight is roughly 20.7 acres and about 166 units. So this did go to the DRC for review. Let's go ahead and jump back to the layout of the development. So as you can see, we've got Spanish Fork Parkway as an exterior street, slant road that leads into Mapleton, which is just across the tracks here. There then would be some public streets that would circulate through the project. I believe we have a slide that shows. So the purple lines here show the phasing. What this also shows is you've got interior space. We've got 3 dedicated park areas with some visitor parking that's dispersed around the green space. Let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. And I'll let Mike speak to these briefly. They've done quite a great job as far as providing us some color renderings that kind of give a good feel of the product that is proposed. As you can see, it's row houses. We've got a rear load product here that are in 3s, and then we also have a front load product that are 4 units per structure, I guess you could say. And if we go back one slide, so the difference between the units, these here, now I've lost my train of thought. These are the rear load units, excuse me. And so you would have a front door that would face out, and the idea behind that, and Mike will speak to it more, Mike DeMarco with Salisbury will speak to it more briefly as far as the look and feel for that frontage onto the parkway. The remaining units that you see here are considered front load, and so you'll have both the front door to the residence and the garage door on the same side of the structure. So if we jump back to the elevation, next slide please. This you can see is the rear load product, and so even though they have a door on the back that can function and probably will function mostly as the front door, a majority of people will probably just pull in their garage and go in their house that way, but then there is the ability that they can have visitors or someone come here instead of parking on expressway or slant and then using the other door. This will provide a nice look and feel. One of the things that was discussed at length with staff and then later with the DRC was just the architecture and the look and feel. Salisbury's done a great job at trying to match the requirements for the remainder of Legacy Farms, and so some of the things that relate to that is the roof pitch, a 612 roof pitch. We've got some pop-outs that give both depth to the front and the rear elevations, but then also provide some breakup of the roof lines. We can see some of the focus on the porches, the columns, the windows, the treatments around those. Done a really great job. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So this would be the front load product, and so here the backs would be facing the interior green space, the open space, the parks, kind of the community gathering place, if you will. What's nice about this, and this top right does it justice, you can see they're still going to have somewhat of a demarcation of here's a little private area that we can have, and then we can still see out into the public areas, and it'll keep eyes on that area as well. So you can see there's a partial wall with an open non-site obscuring fencing on top of that. Once again, we've got some pop-outs, roof pitch, trying to accomplish that four-sided architecture look. And so if there's something that can be said, really great attention to detail as far as especially the units here it's called out, this is exposed to the public street, and so we've got a lot of attention that was put there.
Look, that looks really good, Brandon, that particular one there on the lower left. So anywhere there's gonna be a public street, they're gonna have that. That's great.
And
That's
then
what
this-
we're looking for.
And then this end here, I don't know if you can read the call out, but the buildings are gonna be 10 feet apart, and so that's what you would have in those cases. Let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. So this is showing the overall landscape plan. I know it's kind of small, but the way it's broken up in the submittal is each sheet just shows that extent of the property. And so this kind of gives you the overall. And so once again, we've got the public streets that run through, the sidewalks that are associated with that. There is going to be the trail system that's going to continue along Expressway. We will then have quite a few trees, green space, park spaces, really nice amenity for this project. Let's go ahead and jump to the next one.
Brandon, have they met the landscaping criteria then, the amount of plants and trees, et cetera, for the size of the property?
Yep. Spacing, numbers. Oh, sorry, let's go ahead and go back, back some more. Back to the main cover. Yep, this one here will do. So just to give you an idea, some of the things that we did touch on with the DRC. Find my notes on that. So there are a few things that Salisbury will address with the final plat applications as they come in with each phase. Some of those things that we talked about were obviously temporary turnarounds, so we can make sure that any services, garbage truck or other things of that nature, can get in and out safely. There is a wall requirement for the exterior along the streets, and so there is some options that they can work through with Public Works as far as using the solid 6-foot wall that some of the other neighbors have. Or there is an option for a half and half where we're trying to accomplish that look and feel onto the Spanish Fork Parkway. They are looking at some options as far as some traffic calming on this. This is a straight stretch of over, I want to say about 1,200 feet. And so there's obviously going to be some natural slowdown. If we go to the next slide, you can see it with the parking areas here and here, and then the sheer number of driveways. Mike is looking at some other options as far as making that more clear.
So there's just the 2 exits to the property?
Yep, so there'd be one on the north, which is lining up with the existing access on Slant Road, and then there would be one on Spanish Fork Parkway just north of where we currently have the existing access stubbed in. And so if you've been by the site, you can see on Spanish Fork Parkway, there's already a street connection there. It'll be just north of that. That one will be removed, and I understand the utilities to be capped off and whatnot. One other thing that we did talk about was just the potential for an addendum to the current Legacy Farms agreement, just to finalize the numbers that are in the proposal before you in association with the addition to the commercial zoning and property to the south.
So is there a zoning change required for this?
So if you look on your agenda, after this item, there is the minor zone change that's listed. So that, if we go to the very last slide, that agenda item will address the potential zone change. It's roughly, I think we said 3.5 acres. And so, as you can see from the product, they've got a great layout. This is space that would then be useful in making this more viable for commercial development in the future.
But
So-
it's not required for this.
Correct.
This is we think, a very appropriate step, but it's not required.
Yeah.
So what's the reason to give up that residential property? The 170 units conform to this size of property, even with that reduction? People still,
That's what we're hoping to set in stone and finalize with the addendum, It's just how that goes through and takes place. And so one way to look at it is you could say the 170 was tied to the larger acreage.
Okay?
One of the changes to take note of, though, is the maximum density that's allowed per zone has changed over the years. It's gone upward. And so you could argue counter to that, saying, well, they're still under that current cap, but they're over the cap that was in place with the original creation of the farms. And so we're hoping to just address them giving that to the commercial, which we see as a good thing to do, but then also allow them to move forward with the 166 that's proposed.
So by them giving up some of that R3 to the commercial, it puts them in a higher density than what is currently allowed for legacy. Is that correct?
You could look at it that way, yes.
Okay. But you're also saying that density is increased over the years to argue that?
Well,
You could counter-argue it that way. That's one way to look at it.
and I think everything that Mr. Snyder said has been spot on. He's done a great job of describing the situation. I might describe it from a little different perspective, though. I'm gonna be just as candid as I can be. You asked a minute ago about why we would want to see this change maybe made as the city. And just kind of by way of some history, I think it was back in 2008 or 9, so 10 or 11 years ago, when we first really got into the details of how a development might look when this property annexed. It was a large annexation. It was one of the larger annexations that the city's ever reviewed and approved. And we knew at that point in time that at some point in the future, there probably would be demand. Say we knew and probably, but we had a very strong feeling that there would be a need for some non-residential development in the area. And it seemed like this property was the right place for it. And over the years, as we've learned more about what potentially would work from a market perspective here, frankly, I think it's probably by way of luck more than anything, we got it right. This is a corner that folks have looked at, different retailers, and we also, over the course of the past 10 or 11 years, have learned a lot about just the spatial needs of different land uses. So, for example, and just for the sake of maybe not getting people too worked up, I won't mention names, but we've worked with a grocery store that's prepared a concept plan for this property, and we've sat down with a broker, and we've had multiple meetings looking at this property and some others in the area. And in order, for example, to fit something that might look like a neighborhood Walmart, it wouldn't be that here, there's one a mile away, but something like that, not a huge grocery store, but a contemporary grocery store that would provide kind of all of the services that people expect to see in a grocery store today. You need a certain depth in the property. And what we guessed back in 2008 as being a sufficient depth is not. So we've believed that there was a need to expand that commercial depth. We've had some discussions with the property owners about that over the years. We've talked with different groups that have come in about developing the residential property to the north, what we're talking about now, about, hey, what would you think about setting some more land aside for commercial development? And I appreciate the applicant in this case being willing to do that. And I think part of the reality simply is that they have bought the property, understanding that they would be able to develop a certain number of units. And their willingness to work with the city to provide the additional depth for the commercial property hinges on them being able to develop what they've bought at that number of units or something close. And they haven't hit that max of 170, which I think warrants consideration on the part of the city and working with them so that maybe they would be able to, on a per acre basis, have that density tick up with the understanding and approval of the commercial zone change. I think if that happens, and that's ultimately how the city council approves it, that needs to be memorialized. Again, Mr. Snyder referenced the idea of developing an addendum. It's going to be a pretty simple document that would talk about how the density's been addressed in this case and why that is beneficial for the city. I think also we'd probably touch on some of the architectural components of this proposal that are consistent with the Legacy Farms design guidelines and some things like that. I think that is something that can be pretty succinct and simple. We'd like to keep it that way. But that's how I would, at this point, maybe stop short of pleading for you to consider this and to have the additional land for a commercial project. But I think if we don't make more land available for commercial development at this corner, it probably ends up looking very, very different and probably doesn't develop in, it probably doesn't develop in a completely non-residential way in the future. So, yeah, it may be good news or bad news for folks in the area. But again, we think this is a site that can work to provide some neighborhood-oriented services, which we think are very, it's a very good thing. It's a very, very hard thing to bring to reality. The market's very finicky. Retailers are very finicky. But this is a strong site, and we've had, the retail community kind of validate that with what we've heard.
Hey Dave, the property that's kitty corner to the C2 is zoned AE. Can you remind me what AE is?
It's exclusive agricultural, so basically it just allows for agricultural uses, kind of like that name, I guess. And by kitty corner, trying to refresh my.
Southwest of where the C2 is, so on the other side of 4th North.
Okay.
Dave, my question is, I'm assuming this all fits in the master plan.
This is consistent with the general plan, yeah. And in the case of the townhome development, like Mr. Snyder said, the city's agreed to this use in very explicit terms. So really, it's just a matter of, do you think the look and feel of it's consistent with the Legacy Farms design guidelines? And
That's my next question.
we think, and the applicant's made some changes, based on a discussion even that
Yeah.
several of you were involved in.
That street
and-
view one is an improvement.
Yeah, without a
to the-
doubt. And from our perspective, the yardstick that we've used has been the design guidelines for Legacy Farms. We're trying to really make sure that even though this is a different type of housing product, it fits in as best as possible with that neighborhood.
So Dave, does this meet pretty well what the requirements that the landowners wanted back in 2008 in this area, and pretty well keeps with that density?
Yes. At least based on what they signed, that's what I believe, yeah.
And Dave, with the change in the density, are they meeting all the open space requirements for this type of development?
Yeah, Brandon's really our expert on this.
Okay,
one.
Brandon,
All-
open space requirements all being met with this? Change from 170 down to 166, but taking away 3 acres?
Yeah, and
That's effectively what happened, isn't it? The R3, you took away 3 acres, moved it to the C2, and you dropped 4 units for the 3 acres.
yeah, and we did review the landscaping. It does comply with the code.
Okay.
One thing Mike DeMarco did just remind me, so as Dave Anderson, our CD director, just mentioned to you the details of the addendum. With the final plat, one of the feedback we did receive from Public Works, there is additional cost associated with punching this new drive approach in here, or street, excuse me. And so with the final plat, they will be potentially looking at maybe some cost savings of using the existing approach. And so what that may entail, this is a better image, is just shifting some of these buildings around. Because one of the things we're still trying to keep is, as you come in, there's not a direct line of lights, for instance, from cars shining on the units. And so the final plat, you may see them use the existing street approach or
Just adjust accordingly.
to the north. But that addendum would accomplish as far as defining the total number of units, the total acreage for the project, and then, as Dave mentioned, the other details such as the product of the housing and whatnot. If there's no other questions for staff, if there's,
I've got one for Mike.
oh,
got a second? With this being a little bit higher density than R3, and I think there's a main sewer line that runs up Fourth North, am I right on that? Is there any concern with capacity to the sewer line with higher density on that side?
No, master plan has this type of density plan, so there's nothing for it.
What about if we cross the railroad tracks? Does Spanish Fork have any say with what Mapleton develops on the other side of the tracks? What if they developed super high density, because they tie into that sewer line, right?
They have a limit of the amount that they can actually put into the sewer.
But they can put it wherever they want in the community.
It all goes to one point, so if
They're already developing that side of the railroad track.
It's single-family detached homes,
Yeah.
8,000-10,000 square foot lots.
yeah, if they did propose a water bottling facility or, something that was a lot of waste, car wash.
But Spanish Fork then can monitor and keep track and make sure that they're not exceeding whatever their limit is to the sewer.
There is a meter,
Yeah.
I believe. So yeah, it's metered.
Okay.
They know the limit. If they exceed it, they're in a lot more trouble than we would be.
Okay.
So we'd say no.
Thanks.
If he has anything to add to it, I would like to add this Mike, the applicant, up if he's got.
I have some questions for that, Mike.
Okay.
Thanks, Brandon. Commissioners, thanks for having me. I was thinking about it while I was sitting there. It was 18 months and 3 days ago that I went to Fieldstone and tried to buy their northern piece. So we're excited to be here. We're ready to get going, and we have appreciated all the effort from staff as we've put this together and taken their feedback and your feedback and city council's feedback on the last couple projects we've brought through. So hopefully, we're learning too and kind of help streamline things. But any questions you have, I'm happy to answer.
Great, so my first question is what's your estimated sales price for these?
So Parkview over here is selling for $250 to $260. I would think this market would be similar. Parkview's, with all due respect, kind of the nicest location in town for this type of product, in my opinion. It's right across the street from the park, but everyone, we've built quite a bit in Legacy, and we've, worked pretty closely when Legacy was brought in as the master plan community, and you've got great schools and great amenities up there. People want to live on this side of the town, so I don't think we'll have any trouble. That Canyon Breeze project is 270-ish, so these will probably be similar, 260 to 270.
Mike, I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
I liked the design that you have for the units as shown to us now. Are all of the units going to look like that, or is there a variation that will go through the project?
We'd want to delineate colors and break it up, obviously, but the elevations will be the same, the front loads versus the rear loads. We've got 3 different concepts. That rear load product has a front and a rear entrance, and their own private space, quote unquote. The front loads around that centralized park will all have those enclosed backyards, which is a comment we've received back from current residents. Some people want a fence right behind their unit, some don't, so that gives them an option. And then we'll have the dedicated front loads that are almost a buffer up against the railroad tracks. That's going to be a busy area, and they'll have their own area behind their units without the fencing. So I think everyone can kind of have, the different type of product they want in there.
The general structure will be the same, with the variance in maybe color.
Yes, sir.
And how many do you think you're able to build and sell per year?
What answer would you like me to tell you?
Your best guess.
So we think we can, Parkview, let's talk about Parkview. It has 128 units, and it took us about 2.5 years to build it. And I think that's pretty reasonable absorption. Like Dave mentioned, you're getting 250 to low 300 units in the city a year, so I don't think getting 40-ish to 50 of those in a year is out of line. 40?
40-ish, okay.
Yeah, I would expect we'd want to be out of here in 3 years-ish. We can develop it sooner than that, but I think we'll see what the absorption is. We've all heard the rumors about what everyone thinks the market's about to do. It'll be interesting to see how it affects absorption.
We saw the phases that were drawn in there. What are the first phases that you look to construct? Are the front ones or the ones next to the tracks?
That's a great question. We're still discussing that because there's an argument for both sides. Building up on the north, you're already kind of tied into the existing Legacy, and building the first entrance down to the south, they're out in the middle of a field. So My preference is up at the north end where the things are more established. The traffic flow is a little quieter up in that area. I think getting onto the parkway or the slants is quieter than the parkway. But I think we'll just see. It depends on also this site is challenging in the fact of it's low. Storm drain is going to be an issue. How we're going to contain the water on the site. We're still working through some of those. We're finishing some of those conversations with engineering. I think that's what it'll come back to. Where do we need to store the water? Where can we sewer? Where's power readily available? But I think we'll start on the north side.
Irrigation ditches, are there any on this site that will have to be mitigated?
Thank heavens, no. I've had enough.
On the other side of the road?
I've had enough.
Canyon Breeze.
I don't want to talk about it. We have a checklist. It's like, is SESD on your property? Do you have irrigation ditches?
No, I know we gave you a little bit of a hard time last time you were in. I just wanted to let you know that I appreciate the fact that you've taken some time with the four-sided architecture and put some good thought into your design, and it looks good.
Well, and we appreciate the input. We want a product that looks really nice. The consumer ends up paying for those amenities, but they want somewhere that looks appealing as well, and we're learning too. We're kind of old school, and it's a different world out here right now. We're learning. But I appreciate the input, and we revamped things even, again, just recently based on feedback from staff and just advice that we get from them, and we appreciate that.
Yep.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Brandon, this goes into public hearing, correct? Okay. The commissioner's okay with doing that? Okay. We will open the public hearing on this topic. If anyone's here to talk about that, please come up, introduce yourself. Oh, you can't come up twice in the same night.
Hearing, right? Kedrick Black again. So just one, I guess, couple of questions, and maybe would parking be allowed out onto Spanish Fork Parkway if there's not enough parking, within the area? That would be one question. Having a concern with that would be is what you see when you drive up like by the Somerset up on the north end of Canyon Road. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they can't park inside. A lot of them park outside. So, and what I understand, Parkway is going to be expected to be quite busy and tie down off the hill. So that would be a concern. Also, I guess I have like the Legacy Farms master plan. If you look at that, it doesn't look like the density was as significant as it is now. And I don't know how that developed, and I don't know who would have that. I mean, I get somewhere in the range of 120, maybe 130 units versus, but I hear that it was approved for 170, so I don't know where that came from, but anyway, another concern I have. Okay. Okay.
Mr. Black, real quick, while you're up,
Yes.
can you address, because I'm looking at Google Maps of Somerset, and I can see, there's cars parked all down that. What's your main concern with that?
And there's, I think up there, there's enough space,
Different roads are
because
narrow.
there's enough setback. I don't think that's as big a concern, but I think if there was that same parking along Parkway, I think there would be some concern just because of traffic, and I don't think you'd have as much setback as you get up on the north end of.
We'll address that question. Okay. At the end of the hearing, okay?
My name is Clark Slater. I'm a resident of Legacy Farms, and I just want to add my voice to a concern about the increase in density and the traffic on 400 and University Parkway. 400 is still kind of looks like a small town road, and already that intersection as you're going down that gets pretty dense, especially at rush hour traffic. So just with the increased density, that's one of my concerns.
Okay.
My name is Dustin McGowan. I also live in the Legacy Farms community. One of my concerns also is with the high density, just that intersection on Spanish Fork Parkway and Slant. I come from home from work or from the grocery store, and I have people who pull out in front of me almost every single time to turn left to go on to Spanish Fork Parkway. They completely disregard that stop sign, and I'm assuming with the park, that's just, can't even know which way it is, but there's the big park that's in Legacy Farms. I'm assuming with the this cheaper housing, you're going to have a lot of children that are going to want to cross that road to go to that park. And one of my concerns is how can we make that safe? And another concern of mine, just talking to some of the people in our neighborhood, there's very little support for that more addition to land for commercial. I think, you know, if you're going to be putting, I think I counted, there's like 162 units in there, and I think, how much was it? Was it 30 acres that's being given to commercial? I think the residents should be using that more. And if there's talk about grocery stores, you have 3 grocery stores you can get to in 5 minutes from Legacy Farms. So that's just my concerns.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, we will close the public hearing. We've got a few questions about traffic, and I wondered if we could maybe have somebody speak on
Yeah.
what's going to happen to some of those roads up in that area.
If we don't mind pulling up the interactive map, and then we'll have Michael Clark, our engineer, kind of address some of those. A few of the other things that we heard were related to parking. Maybe I failed to mention this, but each of the units will have a 2-car garage, and then many of them have I've already asked them to change the image, but many of them will have very deep, all of them will have over 20-foot deep driveways, and so the assumption is that those 2-car garages per unit will be utilized, as well as the driveways before
Driveway is
the
deep enough.
exterior streets.
Is deep enough
Correct.
for this
And then
same
they-
topic we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
So they
And
would be able to park outside their garage.
Yeah, and then
without-
the interior streets will be public as well, so there will be some options for parking there before we see it spill over on the exterior.
Okay.
Which, on that topic, and I really appreciate Somerset, that was a learning experience, I think, for the city, and we've learned the hard way. Unfortunately, you can't go back and rebuild how a project was constructed, but the vast majority, for example, of the driveways in Somerset can't accommodate a car without hanging over into the street, and there, I believe are they still private streets in Somerset, do you know? Because it doesn't really matter, but you know, there are just different things about the design, but we certainly would recognize that in that particular project, there's a parking deficiency. I think we saw it from very early on in the history of the development, when you have cars parked on Canyon Road and hasn't changed, and frankly, it probably won't, because there simply is not enough space in the project. So our requirements relative to how a project like this gets designed, something as simple as driveway depth, it's changed over time. There are other projects that were approved back in the early 2000s. Whispering Willows over on State Road 51 is kind of the same way, to where the driveway depth isn't sufficient and there wasn't enough off-street parking provided elsewhere to accommodate, you know, the need then that's created. It's a long way to say that this design and other designs for town-owned projects that I think you've seen in the past several years, you know, they may still have some quirks to them, but on parking, I really think we've loaded for bear, and we've required applicants to provide significantly more parking than what we did back, again, kind of late 90s, early 2000s. Relative to parking on Spanish Fork Parkway, I think it's really hard for us to give anybody a firm commitment one way or another as to whether that would be allowed or not. Our typical practice is to allow for parking, you know, on street in a case like that until it doesn't work. And then, you know, we take some kind of action to prevent that. And I don't know exactly what we might do here, but I agree with the idea that Spanish Fork Parkway someday is going to be a very heavily utilized road in the community. It's kind of our belt route. and it's gonna be a bypass of a lot of congestion that we know will exist elsewhere in Spanish Fork. So my guess is that there's not gonna be parking at some point in time on Spanish Fork Parkway, even though maybe initially there would be. But just relative to the need, I think we've worked hard with applicants to try to make sure that a situation like we have in Somerset doesn't happen again. Relative to density, just to focus on that for a minute. One thing that has frustrated me a little bit over the years is that there has been some imagery produced with like a layout of this project showing some streets and townhome like footprints and different things that I think have been a little bit misleading. And maybe just to focus on what we have right now, that the developer of Legacy Farms and the city council have agreed upon. It's a written contract that says the developer can get 170 units on this property. I am very confident that there's no way for the city to unilaterally back away from that number now. It would take, some type of an agreement that we'd reach with the developer to reduce that density. So whether there are 170 units on the acreage that we're talking about tonight, or that includes 3 more acres, I think the impact relative to traffic on Spanish Fork Parkway or any intersections in the vicinity, it's gonna be the same. And that die was cast a long time ago, and that's just simply what we're working with now. I'd also say though that I think the per acre density of this project, if I remember right, we're in the 8 unit per acre range.
Correct.
Which for a townhome development's really not very dense. The R3 zone allows for up to 12 units to the acre. So from that perspective, again, typically you'd see townhomes at 10 or 11. Most of the time people try to get up to 12. It's kind of hard to get that high, but it's not uncommon to see something north of 10 units per acre for a townhome development. So that's maybe the flip side of the development agreement. Even though our zoning would allow for more than the 8 units to the acre that the applicant's showing on this plan, they have that ceiling of 170. So, again, that's something that cuts both ways. And that I don't believe, like I'm certain there's no way for us to change that at this point. I don't think there's any appetite on the part of any of the property owners or this applicant to see that number go down.
Dave, how close are we to having Spanish Fork Parkway connect?
I'd let Mr. Clark answer that.
Year and a half, and it'll be all the way through?
Waiting on railroad permits.
Okay.
So, throw the dart at a year and a half, but that's gonna be pretty close. We'll finish phase 1, which will take it almost to railroad tracks by the end of this construction year. And then hopefully the permit goes through the last half next year.
Have you got a view, a street view of what this parkway will look like? I think it's 5 lanes, isn't it?
No, it'll be less.
So, well, with the turning.
Two with the turn lane, right?
That top one. Yeah.
So three lanes?
Yeah, originally it was planned for 5, and there were some changes made, I want to say back in 2000 and, actually, ultimately it was changes that were made just last year that up until then, 5-lane road, that phraseology was found in the Legacy Farms development agreement that we had. But you might remember as well that originally, you might be the only one around that would remember, this was going to be a boulevard with a planted median and be a 5-lane facility.
Okay.
But that changed, I want to say, back in, there have been a few amendments to the Legacy Farms development agreement over the years. That changed, I think, with the first one back in 2012 or 13, something like that. And the road right-of-way was narrowed then. And now, like Mr. Mr. Clark said, it's going to be a 3-lane facility.
3 lane. And with that distance on, between the curb and the lane, there's not room for parking there, is there? Once that's,
This is a flat curb, it's not like a deep one on the block area, so really you have another 2 feet in addition to the 6, so you have 8.
Like any-
50s, 7.5 feet, so, and you can park there. That's, again, like Dave said, the depends on how it works, how it feels, how it's utilized, we can always red curve it.
Yeah, okay.
But
Okay.
it was meant to be small. The other, thing to note is, it is 3 lanes. MAG's plan says in 2050, there'll be 14,000 cars. Main Street's high 30s, so it'll be two and a low plus times, or less, I guess, traffic on the parkway. So it will be busy, but it won't be, bumper to bumper traffic. And so this is actually the recommended cross-section. What these swells give us as well is the ability, if we do expand, to add another lane or so.
Oh, okay.
You can use the shoulder, get into this swell here, you can skinny into the median lane, you can fit more lanes if
I see.
need to, without messing with the homes.
Okay.
So while you're addressing that road, one of the other concerns came up was getting from one side to the other to access parks or whatever. There any locations on that road, or maybe you can point out where crosswalks or anything like that would be located?
State Park we're talking about is this one here.
Mm.
Most all these have an access, obviously these are on the same side of the parkway. There's a tunnel right here that would carry this half underneath, and there'll be a trail system throughout the rest of the community that all lead to the park. The only one that's unique is this section, there's no tunnel. The idea of a crosswalk or something would be something we'd have to look more at and see if it's painted, is there flashing signs? Given in this area there is quite a large green space. So my guess is for ease, having little kids of my own, I wouldn't truck it across to that park. I would stay in this green space. It's pretty large given the size of the development.
There's a trail planned for this side, east side of Spinchburg Parkway.
There's a trail there today and it leads and it carries along the parkway. So there is a path, but again, there's no like flashing signs or painted crosswalks today.
But it's a T intersection. I mean, for me,
There's a stop bar right here, stop sign.
yeah, this will be a very comfortable place. And I think much of the design work relative to our trail system is intended to make this a comfortable place for people to cross the street. This is not anything like this is going to be, I think, certainly not at this location from a travel speed perspective or volume probably even. So,
Does slant still go across the railroad track? Okay.
yeah,
And it always will, as far as we know?
yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay.
So best guess, year and a half to have Spanish Fork Parkway completed or connected. So question for Mike, how many phases do you think you could realistically get through in a year and a half?
This is where they changed it, right here.
2 phases? Okay.
Still have to go through final plat, development of the first phase. If we push hard right now, we'll be lucky to get the first phase in before snow flies, then we're trying to build in the winter, which is all whack, so.
Okay.
The
So
first phase will be slow.
not even half.
Your first 3 phases will be slower just because you're into the parkway, you're making connections. Once it's all in, then it can go quicker from that point.
Okay, so the majority of your project won't even be completed by the time this road's in. So.
Okay. I think we addressed most, if not all, of the questions from the public hearing. Any other comments from the commissioners? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve Legacy Farms Townhomes preliminary plat with any recommendations, findings, conditions from the DRC.
Good motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
A second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Yes.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt before you finished.
There was no opposed, no objection.
That was a recommendation, excuse me, a recommendation.
That was preliminary plat?
Recommendation to the,
Okay.
Yes.
Just to be,
Okay, so that was, I recommend to the city council, sorry.
yeah, okay.
Yep.
This will be getting the minutes right away. Thanks.
Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is the minor zone change.
I don't know that there's anything I could necessarily add to it at this point. We do need to have a public hearing on the matter.
Okay.
If there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Oh, this is just 3 acres. Right there, got it.
So we've already had some discussion on this. Is there any, well, I'll open it to a public hearing. Is there anyone that'd like to comment on this? What's that?
Yeah, ask
We
a,
just
yes, a
asked the
question.
question, what would be allowed, what does C2 allow?
Okay, we'll address that. Okay. What type of construction, buildings, businesses, et cetera? Okay.
We have the applicant. I'm assuming Mike's the applicant.
Dave?
Or could you even say what businesses have approached the city managers?
I keep interrupting him, so.
I think he might have something.
The commercial 2 zone is really intended to be a retail zone for the city. So, for example, Macy's, that project there, Shopko, much of Canyon Creek, the Walmart, Costco kind of development, a lot of that zone C2, some of it isn't. So it's things like that, it's restaurants, grocery.
Could you get a gas station?
Gas station is permitted in the C2 zone, like a convenience store, anything like that. We also allow office uses in the C2 zone. We've talked, pardon me?
Service.
Yeah, and any kind of personal service business, so nail salon, hair cutting, any of those types of things. Yeah, it's pretty common.
Dave, who's the owner on that?
It was the Minor family. I don't know if, have you purchased that property? Or is that in the works or what?
We own a portion of it, the miners own a portion.
Okay. So, I don't know the family really well, but it's a family, I know them as the Minor family.
Okay.
Long,
Just curious.
they've owned that property, as I understand it, for decades.
Okay, thanks.
And they're a party to the original Legacy Farms annexation and agreement back, like I said, 10 or 11 years ago.
That, the applicant then for this zone change is probably a combination between the development and the miners? Is that correct? The applicant for
I
this
think
zone
that's,
change?
well, actually, the zone change just impacts the property that they either own or will. I'm not sure if that's changed hands yet.
Okay,
Yeah, all of the minor property is already zoned commercial too, so this is going
okay.
beyond
In
that.
the development, yes.
We've talked with a grocer about putting a store there. That was a couple of years ago. I don't really feel comfortable sharing the name of them, but you'd recognize it. They do a great job. We hope, frankly, and I understand there might be concerns. Sometimes there are concerns about neighborhood kind of oriented commercial. I think from the city's perspective, they'd be a great operator, so we do kind of hope that they come back to the table at some point in time. And that's really why that depth does become important. You won't often see a standalone retail use. They will rely heavily on the use of out parcels or those pads that you see in front of maybe something like a grocery store to generate the kind of traffic that they expect to see to make their use work. And that's largely where that depth becomes important. We've also talked about potentially seeing a good part of that property develop with office uses of different kinds. I heard dentist office. There are folks that like the proximity, for example, to a high school, orthodontist and different things like that. So I think something like that could easily be a part of that development. So there's just a few of the things that we've talked about. Honestly, I think the area still is a little bit green, or it's not quite ready to support a lot of commercial development. So my guess is that we're still probably several years down the road before that could be a reality. But that's really what we're trying to make sure we're planning appropriately for.
How much of that area around there is already zoned for C2?
You could say 0. At least that's how I'd put it. North of US 6 and, except for this property, north of US 6 and, maybe to the east of State Road 51, we don't have anything that's zoned C2, and that's why this is really a strategic location. You catch the traffic from Mapleton on 4th North, which retailers love. They look at the per household income in Mapleton, and they salivate over that. Again, the concept of Spanish Fork Parkway connecting big parts of the community, it really is an attractive site, even though today there probably aren't enough rooftops in the immediate area to get somebody ready to commit, but
Thank you, Dave. We're still in public hearing, if there's anybody else that wants to make comments or questions. Going once. Okay, we will close the public hearing. Any other questions from the commissioners, or we would entertain a motion? This is a recommendation as well, correct? To the city council?
Yes. I'll go ahead and make a motion.
Okay,
I'll make a motion that we recommend to the city council to approve this zone change, the minor zone change.
okay. May I have a second on that?
I'll second it.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Wow, we blew through that meeting. Got her done. Oh, don't say you got something else, Brandon.
I'll let Dave come up and say it.
I didn't see other agenda items.
We do have a
Oh,
few
there is.
items of other business, and then we do just want to finalize that our next meeting will be June 6th. That we had a majority on that.
For our next meeting on June 26th,
Correct.
which is a Wednesday.
Thank you, everyone, for
earlier.
coming.
that works well for us, yeah. We haven't ran by Richard's.
Do you have much forecasted for that meeting that you know of?
Yes, and we do have other business for tonight before we.
No, we're going to strike number 7, Brandon. We took a vote.
Take a vote. We're getting rid of that last one.
I know there's a preliminary plat that some folks, maybe two, that folks would like to have in front of you on the 26th. Both of those are projects that you've already seen in one form or another. I would not anticipate they need to take a long time. We're working on some changes to Title 15 that I'd planned on kind of talking through with you tonight, but I think maybe we're best off to wait
Okay.
until later to talk through those, so we probably won't have a public hearing on that.
When do you see the river bottoms coming to the planning commission?
That's a really good question.
There was some talk about July, but that's probably too quick.
Yeah, particularly moving your meeting up a month, or a week.
Week, yeah.
August, let's maybe just say. I will say that, so maybe by way of an update on the river bottoms, a big component of what we've talked about is the idea of being able to move development rights around. And we're right now actively trying to make sure that we have the best available resources to use to come up with a program that's going to work in terms of transferring development rights. Nobody on our staff, very few people in Utah are experts when it comes to that, but there are communities in Utah that have developed programs and they've worked well. And we're trying to make sure we have the right help to get something put together. And maybe from a timing perspective, I kind of feel like we're in a similar situation with the River Bottoms projects as what we've had with the accessory apartment project, which is that we've talked about it so much that
Yeah.
people are just ready to be done, and we understand that and we're sensitive to it. So we'd like to get to a point, I think by August, to be ready to talk about exactly how a TDR program could work. And then there are some fundamental questions for the Planning Commission and City Council just relative to the extent of that program, whether it's contained to the river bottoms or whether potentially it involves other parts of the community. And I think those issues will sort themselves out pretty easily. For me, it's coming up with a program, making sure that it works for people that want to send development rights someplace, and making sure that it works for people that might be enticed to purchase those development rights and use them someplace else. And that's going to be a challenge, but again, other communities have done it. If they can do it, we can here. I'm very confident with that, but we need to get it right. And hopefully by August, we're ready to talk in some detail about that. Personally, I really like the idea of our next step on that, of involving a pretty detailed proposal And August might be a really good time to do that in a joint meeting with you and the city council, just
Before it comes to the commission then?
before maybe it's presented in a public hearing for
That probably
actual
would be good.
adoption. Yeah.
So Dave, it was mentioned, and I don't know how seriously, but the possibility of, if there's enough interest with citizens in Spanish Fork, people that really wanna leave the river bottoms the way it is, to put a bond proposal out and increase property taxes, get a certain amount of money on a bond, and have the city just purchase all of the land. How
Right.
serious was the city?
Well,
talking
so
about that?
back of the napkin, and I've participated in some discussions relative to that. And roughly, we're talking about 1,000 developable acres. So 1,000 acres for the city to purchase, and I can't remember exactly what dollar value, I mean, let's say
40 to
so
60.
therefore 60,000 an acre, let's just say. Some people would say that's not nearly enough, for you to be able to buy my property. At that point, it's $60 million. And to, and I have to think for just a second to make sure I get this right. So to be able to purchase that, for example, over 20 years, I want to say right now the city's collecting $2.5 million a year in property tax. So if we tripled the property tax that is collected, you'd have $5 million. So now, we could do the math then and talk about how long it would take to pay off a bond if we use that and bought the river bottoms en masse.
If people are serious about preserving that area for their kids and for their grandkids, that's an option.
That's an option, and I'll take it a step further, and I'll say as well that as staff, I don't think we necessarily think this is a real option. It's not extremely realistic, but it would not be my preference for the city to purchase the property. I would suggest that all you really want to buy are people's development rights. So you'd essentially be buying easements on properties. So let's say that you buy the easements and strip the development rights off for half of the value of the property, which oftentimes that's what you pay for an easement, is half the value. So then it's $30 million, and you're doubling property tax. And I'd add to that there are some funds out there that I'm sure we could tap into to pay for some of that 30 million. So I may have just opened up a can of worms that I wish I hadn't, but communities do that as well. That's doable. We like having the second lowest property tax rate in Utah County. But at the same time, we could potentially make something like that happen and certainly not have the highest property tax rate in Utah County. So,
In that scenario, you've bought the development rights, so landowner can still farm it? I mean, would the city still have control of putting a park or walking trails on it? Or did they just buy the development rights?
some of that would depend on some specifics about that transaction and what
Language
all
and stuff.
was involved. Yeah, but in concept,
Just buying that, you'd want to have some control over what you did with it.
and typically when you do that, when you buy development rights, there are very explicit controls relative to what legally then can happen on that property. And easement language, just like a public utility easement or a road easement or different things like that describe exactly what's allowed or not allowed. And again, I'm just speaking conceptually, but one thing that I like about that idea is that I really don't think Spanish Fork City necessarily, or the residents of the community, really want to see the use of the property change that much. They just want to see it stay the way that it is now. So being able to continue to use it for farming, and therefore you have that built-in way to have it maintained over time and that type of thing, I think those property owners probably could be as good as stewards of the land long-term as the city could be. And maybe, if we wanted to buy additional acreage for parks or things like that, then the transaction would just be different. We wouldn't just be buying an easement, but we'd be buying the fee simple land. City manager may not appreciate me sharing my thoughts that way, but we've, and I guess I do feel comfortable saying this about it, we've tried to think of every scenario. We really have, and just what's realistic and what's not. Certainly, we as staff feel like there's an aversion to raising property taxes though, so we're pretty sensitive to that, but
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's a good idea for a work session, though. I suspect the commissioners wouldn't mind this big of an issue, maybe doing another joint meeting with the council.
Absolutely.
Before we see something and have a bunch of questions that we wonder how everybody's feeling. You guys be okay with that? So let's plan on scheduling something before it comes to the planning commission. That be all right?
I
Or
think,
that's a request?
These are requests to the.
I think the council would be comfortable with that for sure. I think they'd appreciate it, but we'll work with them, and
Sounds good.
I'd love to see that.
I think it'd be productive. Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
I think now, I came by, I stood here to say something.
So we'll see you again in 3 weeks.
Acres, yeah, there's a reason.
Let's just dive into that.
Yeah, we do have some people here.
You guys familiar with Annie's Acres? Do you remember Annie's Acres?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
We only talked about it for a few
Yeah,
years.
every
Well,
time I
guess
drive
what,
by, I see a
uh,
few more piles of dirt, so it's coming.
I think we need to make some changes, or it's probably a good idea too. So, as I understand it, we'd like to talk about some potential changes tonight and to have you give the applicants, property owners, developers, your thoughts so that before it comes to you, ready for formal action, we understand what you are and aren't comfortable with.
Okay. River bottles.
You gotta have enough.
I haven't been by there, have you?
Take your time, Jared.
Take your time.
Did you know it's Dave Anderson's birthday today?
Whoa.
His birthday?
Happy birthday, Dave!
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Dave. Happy birthday to you.
As good as it gets.
Your hair playing.
Once every 7 years it happens. It's awesome.
Could have had some.
We've been looking at the master plan, we're updating the master plan right now. So with MAG, what's that? So with MAG, JUB, we're looking at all, well, through the whole city, but we've started to take a really good look at this area. It all really started with this intersection right here with the subdivision. River Bottoms Road, the safety of South Lane, River Bottoms Road. This road right here has a lot of accidents on it. If you actually take how many people actually drive it, and how many accidents there are on that road, it's probably one of the most unsafe roads we have.
Wow.
We have a lot of accidents on 1000 North, but you take how many trips, how many cars are actually there,
Yeah.
it's kind of not necessarily warranted, but it's, you can see that happen. Here you can see that there's a lot of injury accidents, there's just a lot of accidents along this road. So we've been looking to see how to make this safer. So the master plan, the master plan we currently have, the old master plan we call it, has Volunteer Drive connecting here, coming down, tying into South Lane, then heading south through the River Bottoms. Everybody's seen that road that goes through the River Bottoms right through the middle. So we started looking at this. This takes traffic from here all the way through the Bradford subdivision, through here and through a commercial development here, and then on to Volunteer Drive, which is a 5-lane road to Center Street, the future off-ramp. And so now we've looked at it, well, if we align this road here and tie it into Arrowhead Trail, that's a much better route. So we had the traffic engineers model that, take a look at it. We found that we need to do this whether we do this road or not. This needs to be connected. And so, but if you connect this road, we don't need a major arterial collector road through this section. This opens up this area for commercial development. the owner of this property is not very anxious or very excited about putting a 100-foot road through their development. If we don't have this local connection here, they can develop this property a lot better. Obviously, the Bradford's taken another look at this, which they've got another plan that shows this development. It's, in my opinion, a lot better than having a road through it, but,
So would you, is there a proposal to eliminate that road completely?
yes. In
That-
our
that-
master plan, we're actually changing our master plan, that this South Lane Road, if you go back there real quick, our master plan, updated master plan, will have this connection and not this. This will be local. So it won't be a,
So the road will be there, it will be a narrower.
It won't be like Spanish Fork Parkway.
Correct. This is a Spanish
Or,
Parkway road.
or it won't be like Volunteer Drive even
Right.
for that
But it will
matter.
provide a connection to this commercial development, so these guys don't have to come out to Main up and then turn back in. There'll be, if you think of Target and Orem, there's local roads that kind of come up through behind it. So it takes the local traffic off of this and they come through here.
So is the main reason for the change because of the property owner here just really doesn't like that size of a road going through their property? What's the main purpose for this change?
well, the main purpose is to get this connection. So we looked at the master plan. This is a lot better connection. This is the old master plan. We come up through here, went through town. This is an expensive connection.
Yeah, so you gotta cross the river,
Cross the
you've
river.
got the, how's it gonna deal with the trail that's right there?
The trail will go underneath the new bridge. So it'd just be like this bridge. You'd have to go underneath it and then underneath this one.
So who owns this?
This property is the McKells.
Are they willing to work with you then, or you're having conversations with them, or?
We're currently talking with them.
They probably don't want a big road going through their property either, do they?
Well, it hasn't, to back up, we're not master planning this on what the property owners want or dislike, so we're not taking this out because they don't want it. We're taking it out because this is better.
That's better, okay.
So it models better, so we're putting this road in the master plan and taking this to local. It's better to take the traffic through, because you're just going through town this way. This is a more direct route right to the front.
Okay. But there's a lot of traffic coming. It's not so much this development that's
Right,
it's creating a lot of traffic here. It's stuff coming this way.
correct. This development doesn't necessarily warrant this at all.
Which makes sense as well, you've got a lot of kids that are coming to the high school over here that come up this road and have to connect right here.
This intersection needs to be removed. Once we put 50 homes into this development, this intersection fails. We'll only allow 50 homes, whether it's this development, anything in here, we can only allow 50 more units onto that.
Before it's
You're also removing the
dangerous.
removing the roundabout that was talked about right here and putting it down here now.
We'll more likely put it on Bradford Lane.
Jared, this spring, we've seen something that's going to happen about every 7 to 10 years, and that is that the trail that's going underneath Main Street now is under about 4 feet of water, and it'll continue for another week or so. In a design like this, or with the existing trail, is there anything in that design that will alleviate people having to cross Main Street, to use the trail now? Or is that just something we're just gonna have to put up with every 7 years or 10 years?
Yeah, we'll always have to put up with it. Runoff, yeah, we can ferry him.
Jared will steer.
No, we're always gonna have to put up I think it's underwater here, I think every year, for at least part of the time we close it.
It's been underwater now for about 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So, yes, that'll be part of the design, but unfortunately, I don't know that we can, how we fix that. So we do have the we just closed down the under the bridge and they come up on top, cross and cross.
I guess that one of the things that could help that is with UDOT, because that's a state road and whatnot, you adjust the length of the cycle of the light to allow people to cross easier. Right now, that's not much of a thought there, I don't think, because we don't normally have the foot or bicycle traffic across there.
Yeah, if we put this road through, UDOT's really gonna have to, right now, they give all the priority to Main Street.
Right,
So if we cut this connection through, they'll have to reevaluate everything, all the cycles will change. And then, it'll be better for pedestrian that way.
Okay, so Jared, one more time. This road's in, this road's out. Is this, or is it smaller?
Smaller,
Is this in here?
yes.
Okay.
That exists right now?
This road becomes that road, it just becomes a
Huh?
local, this road is actually just becomes a local connection like this. This could come like this, it'll just be how the property's.
But no red light here. This is,
This will always have a light, it'll just be an entrance.
oh, that's right, that's
Think
right.
of the light out in front of Walmart.
That's right, yeah,
It's just a
yeah,
light
yeah.
into the,
All right.
very good.
the commercial development.
So this I've not seen before.
That's
It's
subdivision.
not, it's,
Is that just,
That's as far as we know, is that.
We just received an application for that Monday.
so that's just, somebody's idea of what it might look like?
This is also McCall property.
That's
So
right.
that's McCall, and this is McCall.
And I assume the road's not set yet, but looking at that, obviously if I own that piece of property right there, I wouldn't like how the road's curving.
yeah, with the new design, this road just stubs into here, right about here. It gives this more options, they can, yeah, here it is here. So this is the new development, it takes that big road out of the middle, they get more open space. With this, we would probably take the roundabout and put it here. I don't know that we need this road to the south.
Pardon me, which one's
This
that?
one here. We've got this connection with the roundabout. I don't know if they necessarily need to tie this.
I think it's a really long loop without it, so I
Yeah.
would say yes.
Well, I would move it down here then. But, I mean, if it's there, then I would suggest moving it further to the west.
What's wrong with it right there?
It's just close to this intersection.
Oh.
You just got them right close to each other.
I'm with you.
So, but this is just a preliminary layout. You could move it one lot over and it'd be just fine.
So
This
Firefly's right here, right? That's where you're putting them?
The new ones.
What'd he say?
Actually, I think that's how this whole study started.
So, you didn't get the memo, but amongst us,
I just thought if we're moving them, let's move them
first
there.
had to buy everybody dinner. That was our deal. You weren't a part of the deal. You're off the hook, but we didn't bring it up.
That was me said that, by the way.
So,
So I guess our part, the city's part on it, we're taking a big look at the master plan. And we've decided that the better route is to actually change our master plan that's gonna be coming before you within the year.
Jared, if you'd put up that map again. So if this is moved like that and we come down to that spot with Arrowhead Trail, is that the main road that is planned to go through the middle of the river bottoms?
It'll tie on
With
right
mag.
here. Yes, it'll tie on here.
That would be the one.
The roundabout, yeah.
And that would come up and meet another road still that's gonna be in the river bottoms.
So this will become the main road. This will just become local. Instead of taking all the traffic through the river bottoms through here up to this and all the way out through Volunteer Drive. I mean, they could come here and turn down, which right now they do. They come to South Lane here.
Yep.
Off the bench, turn left, and it's just a dangerous intersection as it is now. So this needs to actually be removed. Even if we built this, this would be removed, but if we build this, this is not needed as a collector.
so do you not have any issues with that? Has this been brought up with UDOT at
There's
all?
already lights at both of them, they'd just be adding the fourth light to both of them.
So I've got to ask, when you say this will be removed, what do these residents do? Are they going to come out this way then? That's their access now and not Main Street?
Well, when I say it won't be removed, it'll just, this part will be
It'll
removed.
be a dead end.
Be a dead end, so
This will be a dead end.
The
These
act-
residents will be able to access Main here, but it's only 4 or 5 people dealing with it instead of hundreds. Okay.
So the people who live here will always have this little part of the road in the back.
I always thought that was gonna be a cul-de-sac.
Yeah,
But that
cul-de-sac.
access would go away. You don't think so? The access at Main Street.
And did we just,
And they would go back west, like Clint said.
did we just rezone this whole corner piece too to be commercial?
What
as
was
well?
that?
Actually, yeah, Dave's right.
It was zone commercial.
Dave's right. The access goes away and this does it the same. Yeah, it's
I think-
Cul-de-sac, and they have to go back the other way.
Or maybe through the commercial property to the north, I could see that. Well, and I guess, while we're speculating,
Probably the houses will
I
go
think
away.
that's it, right?
So turn to commercial.
There's a high likelihood
Squares.
that everything looks different.
Yeah, this,
Different as that, okay.
Part-
Use changes.
Part of what will be advantageous to those people that live there is that they're living on a dangerous, narrow street now, and there's a ditch on the north side of that road that's like 15 feet deep, and it swallows cars every now and again. It's extremely dangerous. And so those people right now can't park in front of their houses and stuff. The road's too narrow, and you've got a deep ditch on the other side. So even if they have to come back, I have to think that these people, that their only access to their property is on that road, would give up the access onto Main Street for the safety of having that a dead-end road with a cul-de-sac and be able to come back through.
There, how much traffic is then on that road?
They'd love it.
Yeah.
6 cars a day or whatever it is versus the traffic.
That's right, and so you'd only have the local traffic rather than what they're putting up with now. And those people like their houses until somebody comes and offers them a lot of money for their commercial development. You know, they're pretty happy there. They got a little bit of ground, and they're, you know, they've got horses and different things. I would imagine that they would kind of welcome the improvement, but then again,
I'm not sure. I know this is up for sale. This, and it will.
but they access from Main Street.
Yeah, well, yeah. The Barrett property does.
Right. So you've only got the 3 houses, I think, that their only access is, yeah.
Okay.
So that's, in a nutshell, that's why the city's involved. We brought this to the developer's attention. This is the McKell piece. They've been made aware of it. The Bradfords have been made aware of it. The Beasleys have been made aware of it. So it saves them a lot of infrastructure to put in their developments. And so Bradford's, the urgency, I guess, behind their part is they've actually started. And so they started with the approved, that's been through the approval process, with the approved road.
Does this change the density or the amount of units or anything with what you guys are proposing?
How many more
I'll let them
units?
speak to it, but I don't think it changes the density, but
It does. They get more units, but it's like 4 to 8 units, and they're at like 4.2 right now, and they'll go 4.6.
Yeah, what's the number of increase?
4.11
In terms of units, what's the increase? 11 more units?
and a bigger park.
So that collector down to 95 feet down to 60 feet gives them a lot more units and a lot more park.
It is a different product, and I'd like to maybe talk about that for a minute.
I'll let these guys talk on that, so.
Yeah, we'll on that.
What?
But regardless, before you can build all those units, you'll need another access road anyway.
So
So-
on that, no matter what we do with this, 50 units, I'd have to put a traffic study. It's right around 50 units. So only 50 units to be built, whether the connection's made
Above or below?
above or below. So if they proceed the way they're approved, they can build 50 units before that road's totally.
Right. But no
If we
more
change the whole layout, they can still only build 50 units before.
until they complete
connect
that.
this.
Yep.
Unless they put the local road through.
Right.
I mean, if that other property develops with the local road, it's still a connection. So ultimately, it's South Lane that fell, so we have to have another access onto Main Street besides South Lane.
Yeah.
I was just talking about, this design has 2 different products. One's really similar, we refer to it as kind of the Springville product sometimes. That 4-unit multifamily building that's aimed at empty nesters, you know, main floor living kind of a thing.
Yes.
And then single-family detached homes on pads where everything around it's HOA, commonly maintained and that sort of a thing. this design also incorporates a different kind of a product. So these are also single-family detached homes that are all accessed by a shared driveway. And I think it'd be helpful if the applicant brought in more detail on this component. And maybe we had some time on the 26th for him to maybe show you elevations and exactly how this would work before they get it all designed and we bring it back for a new approval on that.
Something I would like is just other communities that look like that. If they can bring us some examples in the state of Utah that they've done this kind of product.
Okay.
That's what I'd like to see, so thank you.
So that's a good point. These units right here, that's 4 units, correct?
It is, yeah.
And are they all one building?
They're all attached. You see, this is a driveway.
Yes.
That's shared by all 4 of these units here. This driveway is used
Yes.
by these 2 and so forth.
These up here, these are 4 separate units, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Give us 1 second, we can show you
Okay.
an example in
Okay.
Springville of this cottage courtyard style.
The one in Springville is a lot like this, isn't it?
So both of these
Yes.
products are in Springville.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Yeah, the 4 quads are along 4 South. This is south of Walmart on the west side
Mhm.
of Springville, so you can see, zoom in right there. The Walmart's right here. Okay. So as you can see, there's one driveway that then serves 4 detached and
Yeah.
single-family residences. The problem with the Springville in this is the fencing standards are different. And so the majority of blocks are 6-foot fences, and so it's not as
That's
inviting.
terrible, huh?
Doesn't
Yeah.
feel as open.
Wow.
Yeah.
You can still get an idea, though, I think, of,
Yeah,
now,
that-
personally, I wish there was more of this in Utah. This is really common on the Front Range over in Denver, Seattle market, Boise, different areas like that. I like this because it's a single-family detached home, which I think there's something about that that is really attractive. And you can do this at almost the same density as the other product that we're looking at where they're attached. And I think buyers would prefer this in a lot of cases, so
Over that other one?
I think so.
So,
If you did something with the fences, that looks like a whole different project.
So you like the other one more?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, and the other one looks great too. The fences are.
Can you show that other
real,
one?
real quick, before you go to the other one, and looking at this picture, and what we've talked about tonight, we're basically opening up all of our residential zones to ADUs with our parking, of being able to park more than just what's in the garage.
Yep.
So when you share a driveway like this, how does that come into play?
Well, I'd start here with, that's probably, I would guess, on a 5,000 square foot lot.
So it wouldn't-
So our minimum lot size
Doesn't qualify.
disqualifies this. The parking, you will not have 4 off-street parking spaces for this product either. You might, for 4 units, you might have 2 in the garage and 1 additional per unit, or something like that, but you would not have 2 additional per units. I don't think this would be accommodating for accessory apartments.
Which brings up another question. A development could have its own CC&Rs that could preclude apartments anyway.
And we have some certainly that do. That's right. Yep.
Mine does.
Got it.
Where I live, I found that out.
Yeah, I thought about that when Commissioner Argyle asked the question about how many homes. There's some number that are disqualified for that
Then the
purpose.
question with that becomes, who do I go to when someone isn't complying with the CCRs in my development?
It's not the city.
I-
It's a terrible answer to give, maybe. I just know it's
Not the
not
answer
us.
I wanted.
It's you and your neighbors.
That's right.
You know, you guys are the ones that would enforce those.
Yeah.
Who wants to do that?
You wanted to
Yeah,
see the other?
right.
Yes.
Just the feel.
The other one just feels like big houses, in my opinion.
Is this the one on the north side of Fourth South?
Yeah.
These are really nice.
There's no fences.
These are senior
Fences
living.
ruin the other part. I agree. I
It
don't
ruins
like,
it.
Yeah.
If you could do that differently.
And you can. I've never seen it like that before with the fences out to the sidewalk. Fences in the front yard, that's,
Yeah. That's just,
Not the weekend.
that's like,
yeah. But I mean, from that perspective, like I said, I mean, I feel like it looks like just big houses. And that's really part of the idea.
Yeah,
yeah,
much better look. Get rid of
yeah.
Yeah, the fences are. Springville's done some things much better than we have. If you just look down the street at the street view, this is trees that were planted uniformly at the same time.
It's gorgeous.
This will look awesome in 10 years. We're meeting with some folks Monday to see about following Springville's model. You don't often say that in this community, right?
When we went on the field trip and seen this, everybody just loved it.
You got that famous saying about Jason, how to apply here.
We'll give them one every now and then, right? So,
How far is
I
it?
didn't say Jason.
Well,
People's been fired by saying stuff like that.
Green trucks.
can we ask for a motion to adjourn, or are we that far?
I'd love that.
So we're gonna have these guys bring back something for the 26th meeting.
Yeah, we're just in, with the stopping consumption, shifting here, it's gonna be quick. So we really appreciate you staying after long meetings and giving us feedback. But we'll come back with more detail, but we want to really see our concept.
Bring cookies.
Okay?
We didn't like the fences on that other one. You might make a note of that.
We did
No.
not. We like an
On that
open-
other one?
First one, on the
On the
first one we
first
just
one?
showed you.
I can't say.
We like this one.
Yeah,
No.
not yours.
Yes.
Okay, got it. We'll keep the same fencing.
Yeah, I think
You know what I mean, Dave, right?
Did you have open fences? Yeah, I remember, and those looked good.
So you'll help them get all prepared for us,
I liked that.
okay?
But I'm optimistic too.
Yeah, good. Okay, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay, and we don't even have to vote.
Nice call.
Foot high.